Chapter 74. It wasn't just one or two thoughts that were reflected in his mind. Instead, it was the interweaving prayers of thousands of people. It was a huge impact on his mind. He couldn't tell who was thinking what, and even his own consciousness was drowned in it. These were all kinds of thoughts that were directly imprinted in his mind, just like Amon's own thoughts. He was also aroused by all kinds of desires, and his mind was in turmoil. He had to stay awake and be aware of his own existence so that he wouldn't get lost in them. This road was not easy to walk. Amon had to keep his self-awareness clear at all times. He had to deal with the desires that were aroused by his will. For example, Amon's heart also surged with a desire for his loved ones to be at peace after death, or even to be resurrected from the dead. He didn't know how long he walked, but he seemed to pass through another invisible door. Nedi turned around and said, "Goddess, please leave your necklace." This was the third door of the underworld. Murin's lapis lazuli's necklace disappeared into thin air. After entering the third door, the desires that were reflected in Amon's mind underwent a subtle change. They were no longer the self-prayer of the crowd, but more demands and desires for others and the outside world. For example, a son prayed to the goddess of the underworld, hoping that his rich father would die soon so that he could inherit the family fortune. A woman prayed to her rival in love to enter the underworld as soon as possible so that the man she loved would fall in love with her and marry her. Some people prayed to the underworld that their family and friends could live a long and healthy life. Some doctors prayed to the underworld that their patients could recover safely. Amon's consciousness was wrapped in these complicated desires. He could only protect his mind from being swallowed by them. All kinds of desires just flashed by. He couldn't distinguish them in detail, and he didn't dare to ask them one by one. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. Could the gods hear these things? They should be able to hear them. But would the queen of the underworld, Kella, care about these things? Amon understood one thing. At least the gods wouldn't deliberately pay attention to these things, because they had heard too much all the time. After passing through the fourth door of the underworld, Nedi turned around and said, "Goddess, please leave your earring." Murin's sparkling earring also disappeared. After entering the fourth door, what entered Amon's mind was no longer pleading and praying, but all kinds of curses, resentment, and abuse. This feeling was very uncomfortable. Many people's resentment and curses directly rushed into the mind, forming a kind of power that could almost destroy the self-consciousness in the soul. Could the gods also be cursed? This was very normal. For example, when people lost their loved ones, they would curse the Netherworld King for her cruelty and think that everything was her doing. There were also people who questioned the Netherworld King. Why were there so many people who should have died but didn't? Why were there so many people who shouldn't have died? Speaking of which, it was interesting. The desires behind the fourth door were not as numerous and complicated as those behind the first two doors. Perhaps it was because most people were afraid of death and cherished their lives. After all, there were not many people who believed in the Netherworld King and dared to curse him. After passing through the fifth door, Amon suddenly fell into a trance. If he wasn't walking in this world that was like a void, he would have fallen to the ground. The world behind this door was completely different. He saw and heard many things. They were the experiences of the people who prayed and cursed. Their prayers and their own actions, what they wanted others to do and what they had done, all the thoughts they had before dying, all the memories, regrets, resentment, despair, and peace. This was not something he could see with his eyes, hear with his ears, or even sense with detection magic. It was the world that appeared in his mind, and he could see everything clearly. In theory, this was a great opportunity for Amon to experience the world. He didn't need to travel to the continent to see all kinds of things in the world. But in fact, he couldn't and didn't dare to. Even in the deepest level of meditation, he didn't have the ability to distinguish such a huge amount of information in an instant. The only thing Amon could do was to calm down and let the scenes of the world flow through his mind. He didn't have to think about it or pay attention to it. At this time, Nedi turned around and said, "Goddess, please leave your bracelets. The golden bracelets on Murin's wrists also disappeared. After entering the 5th door, Aman felt like he could see everything, but at the same time, he couldn't see anything. It was the most painful torture in the world. After walking for a long time, he suddenly felt relaxed, as if he had come back to life. Then he heard Nedi's voice again, "Goddess, please leave your brooch." The brooch on Murin's dress was also taken away by an invisible hand and disappeared into the void. So they had passed through the 6th door without realizing it. After entering the 6th door, the feeling was almost the same as the 1st door. It was a boundless void, and nothing existed except for a clear soul. It was as if even one's body had disappeared. For some reason, Aman felt that there was something different here compared to the 1st door, but he couldn't clearly sense the subtle changes. It was beyond the limit of his soul. As he walked forward, he seemed to have the concept of time and space again. There was always a force stopping him. There was nothing in the void that could stop tangible things, but he had to restrain his spirit to keep up with Nedi's pace. Murin's radiant figure was his guide. He used detection magic to sense the void. It was no longer endless and unfathomable. Instead, there was an oppressive force that made him feel like he existed alone in this world. Aman remembered that this was the underworld, the place where the souls of the dead came from. Since ancient times, people had asked themselves this question. If a person died, did he leave the world he lived in, or did the world he lived in disappear? When this question arose in his mind, a boundless gloominess filled him. A force surrounded and attacked his soul, as if his spirit was being controlled by something. This power was awe-inspiring. Aman had to stay awake again. He didn't know where to focus his mind. At this moment, Nedi stopped and said, "Goddess, the last door of the underworld is in front of us. Kella is waiting for you there. Please leave your robe here." Things changed when they passed through the 7th door. Before, Murin was asked to leave her belongings behind after the door was opened, but this time, she was asked to leave her belongings ahead of time. Murin had nothing on her except a golden dress. With Nedi's voice, the goddess's dress disappeared, leaving her naked like a newborn baby. Aman stood behind her. The goddess's beautiful body was the only one in the boundless gloom, and it was also a very beautiful silhouette. When Aman didn't know where to focus his mind, he saw such an alluring female body. He simply focused his attention on it. Beautiful, so beautiful that it was like the fantasy of every man in the world. Aman was also a man. After passing through the 6 doors of the underworld, Aman, who hadn't been distracted all this time, finally got distracted. He asked himself, "Is this my dream? Is this my dream as a man?" Suddenly, a thought popped up in his mind, "Can I see this Icho?" As soon as he thought of this, the naked Murin in front of him seemed to have turned into Iko. Maria. When Aman met Iko, she was still a weak young girl. He had never seen her body, but he felt it when he held her in his arms. Was it like this? Probably not. Murin was beautiful, but not the kind of beauty that Aman wanted the most. Or rather, not the kind of beauty that he dreamed of. If Murin knew what Aman would think when he saw her naked body, she would be very angry. But as the goddess said, she could feel all kinds of emotions and feelings in Aman's heart, but she couldn't completely understand what he was thinking. As Aman stared at Murin's beautiful body, an uncontrollable desire surged in his heart. Suddenly, he heard Murin's voice, "Bad boy, you're lucky. But now is not the time to think about it. Don't talk to my sister. She won't ask you anything." Then the goddess scolded, "Nedi, if you dare to look back, I'll seal your eyes forever. It's not fair, it's not fair." Aman saw everything, but Nedi can't even look back. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. It was as if he had traveled from the world of nothingness to the real world. Only then did Aman realize that he hadn't gone anywhere else. He was walking in the huge cave. In front of him was a hall formed by a rock cave, but it was splendidly decorated with all kinds of precious treasures. At the top of the cave, many gods' stones emitted a soft light, like a starry sky. There was a luxurious chair on the platform in front of him, and a woman was leaning on it. She held a staff and wore a golden crown on her head. She looked at Murin, who had just passed through the door and appeared in the cave with a faint smile. Her face was vaguely similar to Murin, and her long brown hair draped over the armrests and reached the ground. Aman had seen this person before. In the shrine in Arcade, he had seen a relief on the wall, and Murin was among them. Only then did he realize why this woman looked so familiar. The woman in front of him was also among the reliefs of the gods. Her facial features and figure were almost perfect, but the bridge of her nose was a little high, and the tip of her nose was a little sharp. There was a profound and awe-inspiring aura in her eyes. She should be the legendary queen of the underworld, Kella. My sister, I'm glad to see you like this. Why did you come to my realm? Kella did not get up from the chair, but her eyes were looking straight at Murin's naked body. Her expression was clearly mocking and humiliating. Under the light of the parangons all over the cave, Murin's alluring body was clearly visible. Her plump breasts, slender and strong waist, and the shallow pubic hair tucked between her legs under her lower abdomen were all clearly visible. Murin stood so shamefully in front of another goddess. It was such an embarrassing scene, but she straightened her chest and said with a straight face, "My sister, the queen of the underworld, I have brought a child with me. He is a survivor of the town of Duk. I have brought him to see his family for the last time. They are the people who are protected in my realm, so I can make such a request." Kella said in a mocking tone, "Child? I don't think he is a child, is he?" "Well, he is indeed a child. Murin, you can indeed make such a request." She did not know what the queen of the underworld meant. Although she was talking about Aman, her eyes never looked at her, as if she did not care about the existence of a mortal like Aman. Kella gently waved her hand, and Aman suddenly left the hall where the two gods were. He did not know what kind of world he had come to. It was a bit like the situation behind the first door of the underworld, surrounded by boundless void, as if the world did not exist, or he did not exist. Aman used detection magic to check the surroundings and found that there was a dark shadow in the void, and then it condensed into the appearance of many people. Aman recognized his father at a glance and hurriedly rushed to him, opening his arms and trying to hug him. However, Aman hugged empty air. His father's soul was in front of him, but it seemed to be very far away and not something he could touch. He hurriedly shouted, "Father, it's me, Aman, your son has come to the underworld to see you." But his father did not respond, as if he could not hear Aman's voice. In a hurry, Aman used message magic to turn what he wanted to say into a message directly into his father's soul. The soul that did not respond suddenly seemed to be awakened. His father lowered his head and looked at Aman with tears in his eyes. "My son, is it really you who is back? Where is this, and what happened to me?" Did his father not know that he was dead? Or perhaps his soul had always been imprisoned in some strange state. Aman cried, "Father, this is the underworld, I have come to find you who have passed away." His face was already full of tears, and he had thousands of words to say, but he did not know how to say them. His father seemed to be greatly shocked when he heard this. He raised his eyes and looked forward, murmuring to himself, "Yes, I am dead. The flood from the Saya Plateau. Son, my son, I just want to tell you one last thing, don't live like me." Aman hugged his father's legs and replied with tears in his eyes, "Father, I have finally seen you and heard your voice." His father lowered his head and looked at Aman with a gratified smile. Aman looked up at his father and found that his father's face gradually changed into the youngest and most handsome appearance of his life, and then disappeared in Aman's arms. Tears dripped down and passed through Aman's body, but he did not know where they fell. Aman wanted to cry out loud. This was really the last time he would see his father, and he would never see him again. But at the same time, he had a feeling that his father's soul should be free, leaving this world of the underworld and no longer being manipulated and controlled by some power. Aman knelt in the void and cried, knowing that he would never see his father again. Did he leave behind even more regrets after completing this last wish of his? His heart became empty, and he did not want to think about anything anymore. At this moment, a man walked out of the heavy shadows and came to Amon and said, "It's you, Amon. You are not dead, but you can enter the underworld." Amon was taken aback. His father's soul had not sensed anything just now, and he had to use message magic to wake him up. But this man's soul could walk directly to him and speak. He looked up and saw that it was Mayor Dusty. Mayor Dusty seemed to see Amon's surprise and explained to him, "I don't know why I can see you, but I suddenly heard your voice just now, as if I was awakened from a deep sleep and realized what had happened. I used to be a mage, a priest of Duk, and I know how to guard my mind." Amon stood up and said, "Mayor, don't you know that you are dead?" Dusty showed a sad expression. "When that moment came, many desires blinded my mind, like shackles that entangled my soul. Thank you for coming here and awakening my soul. Child, I have two things that I must tell you in order to be free. Lord Mayor, if you have something to say, just say it." Dusty said, "My son Moses is studying in the academy of the city, and his servants are also residents of Duk. When the disaster came, I happened to send a group of people to the city to pay tribute, and at the same time, to bring something to Moses. They should have survived together. I don't know how the child is now. If you can get out of here, please find him and help him. All the title deed of Duk is in the hands of Moses. I hope you can guide them to rebuild their home. If Duk is no longer suitable for living, then find another land, at least its descendants are still here." His wish was actually the same as Murin's. Amon finally understood who the other survivors of Duk were. Amon came to the underworld to find his father. How could he refuse another father's love for his son? He nodded and said, "Mayor, please rest assured, I promise the gods to do this, and of course I will promise you. I will find Moses and guide him back to his hometown to rebuild his home. After the flood, that place will become a fertile land." Dusty showed a gratified smile and nodded. "The second thing I want to say is related to this place. It was you who awakened my soul. When I woke up, I realized that the underworld I was in was actually a space that imprisoned souls. The master of the underworld was using a kind of magic to manipulate the souls of the dead. Although I don't know what her purpose is, I know that this is not the true home of the soul after death. At this moment, I seem to see my whole life and understand the doubts of this life. Thank you." After saying this, Dusty's soul slowly disappeared in front of Amon, but Amon stood there without moving. He had a strange feeling that he had traveled through Dusty's life, but this moment was so long that it could even subvert people's understanding of the concept of time. When he came back to his senses, Dusty had already disappeared. Amon felt like he had just had a dream. He had witnessed all this, but he also felt like he could not remember anything. Looking ahead, there were many familiar figures, including Shog, who had framed him, and Maki, who had died long before the flood. Amon suddenly realized that he seemed to have gained an ability that allowed him to feel the emotions of these people, as well as their emotions. Wasn't this the ability that Murin said only the gods had? Amon felt that this ability was not gained, but awakened from forgetfulness. Was it because he was facing a soul instead of a real living person? Amon ignored Shog and Maki who were nearby and walked past them to another person. It was his neighbor's aunt, the woman who often sewed clothes for him. He used a divine message to wake her up. Souls could not lie. There was no disguise. They were completely exposed. As more and more people talked to him, more and more souls disappeared from the underworld. Not long after, Amon suddenly heard an angry voice shouting, "Murin, I'm afraid the person you brought here is not just to see his family. He has let too many souls escape from my underworld. I cannot tolerate this kind of behavior. This person must stay and receive punishment." When he heard this voice, all the souls around him disappeared. Amon fell into the boundless world of nothingness again. Then he heard Murin's voice again, "Queen of the underworld, the magic of the dead has its own rules." Amon did not mean it. Kella, but he let so many undead go. I can take him as my slave to make up for it. This is my realm. Murin also shouted sullenly, he is a lost sheep in my flock. I must bring him back. Kella replied with a sneer, you brought him here, of course, you can take him away. My sister, as a god, you should know the rules here. You can exchange another person for Amon. But for you, I have an additional condition. The person who will exchange him must be a man, and it must be a man you have loved. Nettie, see the guest out. After this, Amon did not hear Murin's voice again. The underworld was filled with the chanting of Kella. This song was very familiar to Amon. It was the song that Gilgamesh sang when he met Yun-Namna. Which person have you loved never changed your heart? Once a young lover, how many times did he cry for you every year? The shepherd you loved, piled the most delicious snacks in front of you, slaughtered the most beautiful lambs to feed you, but in the end, he was whipped and turned into a wolf. The bird you loved, had its wings broken, the lion you raised, wandered with wounds. Kella's song gradually dissipated, like the souls dissipating in the underworld, and everything fell into endless silence. Amon realized that he had encountered the worst situation he had expected. He was trapped in the underworld and could not get out. Kella made a condition to Murin, asking her to exchange a man she loved for Amon. Amon knew that he was not the only surviving descendant of Duk. If Murin wanted to rebuild the realm, she did not have to look for him. It did not seem worth it and it was unnecessary to do so. Before entering the underworld, Murin told Amon about this possibility and said that he could wait for her to rescue him, or find a way to escape by himself. It seemed that this time Amon had to find a way to escape by himself. But how could a fifth-level sorcerer like him escape from this seemingly endless underworld? Chapter 75. Send me back to the Igud. Amon's current situation was his own doing. He had awakened too many souls and freed them. He couldn't help but ask himself, if I had known this would happen, would I still have done what I did? The answer was yes. He would still have done what he did. He couldn't just watch the souls of his father and Mayor Dusty be imprisoned in the underworld. While he was thinking about this, Amon was also using detection magic to check the void around him. When he saw someone suddenly appear not far away, he hurriedly turned around. The gatekeeper of the underworld, Nettie, emerged from the darkness with a black mist-like chain in his hand. He said coldly, Amon, please hand over your soul to me and become the eternal servant of His Majesty the King of Hades. Nettie's voice was cold, without a trace of human emotion. It didn't allow Amon to resist. However, just as the gatekeeper of the underworld approached, before the black mist-like chains in his hands could fully unfurl, he suddenly let out a strange cry of terror, as if he had seen something extremely terrifying. He turned around and disappeared into the shadows, running away faster than he could fly. He saw Amon take out 3 scrolls and throw 2 of them to him. There was also a gray scroll in his hand. Amon's decision was very simple. If he wanted to escape, he should try his best to escape now. If his soul was imprisoned by Nettie, he might never have the chance. The most powerful means he had were the 3 unmarked high-level magic scrolls left behind by Nero. Nero used these 3 scrolls as repayment, which showed how precious and powerful they were. Amon thought that he wouldn't have to use them for a long time, but he didn't expect that he would have to use them so soon. After passing through the 7 gates of the underworld and seeing Kella, Amon judged that he hadn't gone anywhere else. He was still in the huge cave. It was unknown what kind of power Kella had used to set up a strange magic formation that made everyone who entered this place feel as if they had entered another world. It must also contain some kind of extremely brilliant spatial magic and message magic. The silver-white scroll with a slender axis left behind by Nero was called Space Turbulence. It could break the seal of the space barrier and was the best means of escape when trapped in a divine space. However, the casting of space turbulence would produce countless spatial cracks, which could hurt the caster himself. Therefore, it was a very dangerous high-level magic. The other scroll with a golden shaft was called Information Annihilation. It could disrupt the sealed information of divine spells and was a destructive divine spell. High-level information magic combined with spatial magic could not only be used to store and transmit information, but could also be used to create all kinds of disguises and traps. Information annihilation was used for destruction. The effect of these two scrolls was just right for the environment Amon was in at the moment. When he took out the scrolls from the bone under his ribs, he also took out the gray scroll with unknown effects, but he didn't throw it out. Nettie, the gatekeeper of the underworld, seemed to know his stuff. When he saw Amon take out these scrolls, he knew that something was wrong and quickly ran away. Amon didn't know which scroll he was afraid of. Information annihilation could disrupt the illusory world created by the magic, and space turbulence could help Amon escape from the divine space, but he didn't know where he would be taken. With his current ability, he couldn't completely control these scrolls, and he might be torn to pieces by the countless space turbulence. But Amon had another way to protect himself. Unfolding the two scrolls, Amon took out the bone from his clothes and unfolded it into an invisible ship in the endless void, entering the strange space. Information annihilation broke out, and there was chaos everywhere. He couldn't sense anything. Then, space turbulence broke out, and the world around him seemed to be torn into countless pieces. The invisible ship took Amon through all kinds of messy forces, and he didn't know where he was going. Even Amon himself didn't know. No matter where he went, it was better than staying in this gloomy underworld, where his soul was imprisoned. He disappeared and escaped from the world of the underworld. In the depths of the cave, in the huge underground palace, Kella's voice was as loud as thunder. Nettie, you can't even stop a 5th-level sorcerer. You let a living person escape from my underworld. What angers me most is that, as the gatekeeper of the underworld, you stepped aside to let him pass. Nettie, who was always shrouded in shadows, stood in front of Kella and replied in a trembling voice, My great queen, guess what I saw in his hand? He took out a Tiamat's Wrath, and was about to use it. Kella was taken aback. What? Tiamat's Wrath? Who can make such a scroll? And who is willing to make such a scroll? Nettie cautiously reminded, the Mage of Igut, Nero. He can make such a scroll. Haven't you heard of him, your majesty? Kella frowned, I've heard of him. He's a genius in the human world. Did he really make such a scroll? But this man died more than 30 years ago. How could Amon know Nero at such a young age? When he came here, I saw that he couldn't have a scroll with him. Besides, using Tiamat's Wrath is suicide, not escape. I can feel it clearly. He didn't use it. Nettie explained, he just held it in his hand and didn't use it. Instead, he used the other two scrolls, Information Annihilation and Space Turbulence. Kella scolded, Of course I know what happened in my realm. It was indeed the effect of these two scrolls. Amon is gone. Nettie's voice was very low, as if he was afraid of angering the queen again. The information annihilation made it impossible for you to detect him, but I'm afraid he was torn into pieces by the space turbulence. Kella roared, if he really wanted to kill himself, he could have just used Tiamat's Wrath. If you didn't run fast enough, you would have died anyway. Why use the two scrolls? He obviously wanted to escape from the underworld. There's only one thing I don't understand. He brought the scrolls in, but I didn't notice the gatekeeper of the underworld. What do you think? The queen's angry eyes were as terrible as the space turbulence. Nettie took a step back, Murin. It must be Murin's doing. Only a god can do that. She hates you for humiliating her and wants to embarrass you. She must have colluded with Amon. How was that possible? Murin was not with Amon when she left, so it was impossible for her to give the 3 scrolls to Amon. Amon's 3 scrolls were suddenly taken out from his body, seemingly out of thin air. As the master of the divine realm, of course, Kella clearly sensed it. But before she could figure out what was going on, the information annihilation broke out and Amon disappeared into the space turbulence. But from Nettie's point of view, Murin was the only plausible explanation. The biggest doubt was left to Kella herself. Now there was another problem. If Murin really wanted to exchange someone for Amon, the queen of the underworld would not be able to do so. Even goddess Murin did not expect that as soon as she left the underworld, Amon would escape without a moment's delay. When Murin reappeared outside the cave in the canyon, she had restored her dress, golden crown, ornaments, and staff. She looked back at the entrance of the underworld and said bitterly, "Kella, my sister, I will remember today's humiliation, and I will repay you sooner or later." Just as she was about to leave, she sensed an inexplicable spatial fluctuation coming from the depths of the underworld. She cursed again, "What the hell are you doing now? Imprisoning Amon and causing such a huge commotion? Are you trying to make things difficult for me? Fine, I'll send someone in exchange for Amon." Her figure disappeared from the canyon, and after some time, she reappeared somewhere in the Assyrian highlands. This was within the borders of the kingdom of Assur, a vast and desolate plain shrouded in clouds and mist. Glaciers and snow could be seen everywhere. Murin walked forward, waved the ivy staff in her hand, and entered a wonderful world that mortals could not see. The vast grassland spread out like an undulating carpet of green. The trickles were so clear that the bottom could be seen as they meandered between the hills. At the foot of the mountain in the distance, flowers bloomed, and among the flowers was a beautiful palace, from which came the sound of dancing music. Who would have thought that there was such a wonderful place in the depths of the Assyrian highlands? If the gods did not open the door, even mortals would not be able to find a trace of it. Murin quietly walked into the palace, passed through the cloisters, and entered a very luxurious hall, where the music came from. A beautiful girl was standing in the middle of the hall, swaying and dancing. She was wearing a light muslin dress, and her top just happened to cover the highest part of her chest. As she danced, her alluring breasts were faintly discernible. The lower part of her dress was very short, and a gold chain was tied around her bare waist, on which hung a tear-shaped pendant. The pendant kept hitting her raised hips, making a pleasant tinkling sound. There was a reclining chair in front of the hall, which was originally the seat of the goddess, but now there was a man lying on it. The man had fair skin, looked very young, was quite handsome, and his facial features were like perfect marble carvings. He was holding a glass of wine in his hand, and was enjoying the dance of the girl in front of him. "Shubra, Dums, what are you doing?" The goddess suddenly appeared in the hall and asked, her voice revealing a deep chill. Shubra, who was dancing, heard the voice, turned around and threw herself at Murin's feet, and said with surprise and joy, "My great goddess, you have returned from the underworld." Murin said coldly, "Of course I'm back, do you want me not to come back? I didn't expect that my maid would seduce my husband while I was away." Shubra took 2 steps forward, opened her arms, and said with tears in her eyes, "No, goddess, you misunderstand. It was your husband Dums who said that you had gone to the underworld, and your sister would not let you come back. He asked me to offer a beautiful dance and serve him sincerely, and he would think of a way to save you. I'm telling the truth, goddess, I can't lie to you." The man sitting on the chair had already jumped up, a little panicked and embarrassed, and tried to show a friendly smile. "My dear goddess, I'm so happy to see you back, I was just thinking of a way to save you." Murin pointed at the beautiful maid and said, "This is your idea? Very well, then go and save me. The queen of the underworld wants me to send a man that I have loved to be Hades' servant, and that man is you." As she spoke, she had already raised her staff and pointed it at Dums. "Murin, you've gone too far. As a goddess, you can do whatever you want. You lusted for Gilgamesh and was rejected, but you made Enkidu fall in love with you. How many men have you loved in the past, and then hurt them? I just asked an elf maid to dance a little, and I have to suffer such a cruel punishment." Dums also showed an angry expression, and loudly scolded Murin. Suddenly, he threw the wine in his hand at her. The wine turned into a golden mist, and the entire hall was shrouded in golden smoke. With a light shout from Murin, the smoke condensed into countless tiny ice droplets and fell to the ground with a tinkling sound. "Just a dance? Would I do such a thing? I'm not only punishing you for betrayal, but also for the crimes you committed during the betrayal. Murin's figure appeared from the smoke, but Dums was already gone. At the same time, he turned into a snake and slipped out of the hall and the palace. He quickly left the strange god's cave and disappeared among the mountains of the Saya Plateau. Murin's anger had not subsided, and seeing Shubra still kneeling in front of her, she shouted, "My elf maid, why didn't you escape with Dums? Are you still loyal to me?" Shubra's tears did not stop. "Great goddess, Shubra has always been loyal to you, you should know that." Murin's anger faded a little, and she slowly nodded, "Yes, I know that this is Dums' betrayal. Take my staff, go to all the divine realms that belong to me, take my divine servants Shera and Taku, and capture Dums. Take him to the underworld and give him to my sister Kella in exchange for a man named Amon." The elf maid reminded, "Goddess, Dums is your husband after all." Murin coldly said 2 words, "ex-husband." Amon probably never dreamed that he would be so lucky that Murin actually ordered people to capture her escaped ex-husband, and planned to send him to the underworld in exchange for him. And where did Amon go at this time? He entered the invisible ship, and the space turbulence erupted. In the chaos, he was violently hit and pulled by the turbulence, as if he was passing through a torrent of water. He was in a trance, and he did not know how much time and space had passed, and he did not know where he was. Fortunately, there was the protection of the strange space transformed by the bone, otherwise Amon would have been torn to pieces by the space turbulence. A huge shock came from all directions, and Amon almost fainted. Then the invisible ship stopped, and everything finally calmed down. He actually appeared in a world under a starry sky. The invisible ship was stranded on the edge of the water, and he did not know whether it was a lake or an ocean. In front of him was the shore, and there were shallow weeds growing between the mud. Looking further ahead, there was an endless desert. What is this place? How did he appear here? However, Amon did not have time to think. He immediately jumped off the ship, waved his hand to retrieve the bone, and rushed to the shore of the lake. Because he saw a cat, lying on the shore of the lake, very weak and dying. It was Schrödinger, whom he had not seen for a long time. "This is the Saya Desert, the border of the Anunnaki. I know you have the scroll and the bone, and can escape from the underworld. I used all the power I could gather to bring you to this place. Go southwest, take me back to Igut." This was what Schrödinger wrote on the ground with its claws. It was very messy, and it should not have finished writing. Its claws hung limply in the soft mud. The cat was lying unconscious on the wet soil on the shore, its fur stained with mud and had lost its original luster. So it was it that brought Amon here. What an indescribable miracle. Seeing the words on the ground and looking around, Amon suddenly recognized this place. He had seen it in the magic images shown by Yun Nam Na. The landslide caused by the flood had cut off a tributary of the Euphrates River. The river had changed its course through the swamp and converged into a huge inland lake in the northern depression of the Saya Desert. He was now standing on the southern bank of the lake. From here, through the desert to the south and then west, one could reach the border of the Cape States of the Empire of Igut. From the valley where the entrance to the underworld was located to the southern bank of the lake, it was thousands of miles away. Amon had escaped from the underworld through the spatial turbulence and appeared directly here. Amon did not know whether it was the space of the underworld or Schrödinger's power, but the cat could not explain anything to Amon now. Amon remembered that Schrödinger always liked to sleep. Was it always gathering power? But this time, it had used up all of its power to bring him here. He picked up Schrödinger gratefully and used the bone as a staff to cast almost all the healing magic he knew. Light flickered by the lake, gathering from all directions and the sky onto the cat in his arms. But Schrödinger was still unconscious. It seemed that he would not wake up for a while. Amon was worried, but there was nothing he could do. He looked at the message left by Schrödinger. The magical cat should be fine. It just needed some rest. Before it passed out, it left a message for Amon to take it back to Igut. Amon's original plan was to go to the Cape States to return Nero's relics after leaving Arcade. This time, he was able to successfully escape from the underworld thanks to Nero, who had left behind the scroll. So, he decided to take this cat to Egypt. He still had the customs clearance document signed by Drick. According to Crazy Ol, this cat was stolen from the Temple of Isis. Now the cat wanted Amon to take it back to Igut. Did it want to go back to its hometown? Amon felt strange. Schrödinger could run from the Euphrates Valley to Duk, and now it could cross the desert and come here. If it wanted to go back to Igut, it could. Why did it need him to escort it? Chapter 76. I'll give you two choices. To cross the desert alone, one must be fully prepared. In that kind of environment, even elemental magic would not be able to gather enough water. Fortunately, Amon had the magical bone. He gathered water by the lake and stored it in a container. Then he sat down and rested Schrödinger in his arms. The next morning, Amon set out, just like when he left Duk, with an iron staff in his hand and a sleeping cat in his leather pocket. He walked alone through the wilderness. This time, he was not going deep into the mountains. Instead, he was going south in the desert towards the distant and strange empire of Igut. Although it was winter, the sand reflected the scorching sun in the boundless sand dunes. There was no place to hide from the sun. It was as if the sun would roast people dry in no time. Even the scorpions had burrowed into the depths of the sand. Amon walked unhurriedly without stopping. He wanted to find a place to rest, but he found that there was nowhere to hide from the sun and the heat. Instead of sitting on the hot sand, it was better to keep going. If someone was around, they would notice that the air around Amon was very cool. He had used magic. He did this not to make himself comfortable, but because he was worried about the cat in his leather pocket. Schrödinger was very weak. Amon could not bear to let it suffer in the desert anymore. As he walked, he recalled what had happened to Madanzo, Princess Sisela's plot, Yun-Namna's plan, and everything he had seen in the underworld. Amon felt a trace of relief in his sorrow. His father's soul finally rested in peace, and Mayor Dusty's soul was also freed. Crazy Ol once said that Amon should thank and repay Dusty. Finding Moses and guiding him back to his hometown to rebuild was Amon's gratitude and repayment. Mayor Dusty's soul told Amon that the underworld was not the true home of the dead, but a world created by Hades with a divine spell that could control the dead. Amon followed Yun-Namna through the 7 gates of hell. He had a complicated feeling. Could that be the so-called God's realm? This is very suitable for the identity of the Netherworld King. I wonder what are the different mysteries of the divine realms of other gods. Now that he thought back to the 7 doors, Amon always felt that something was missing. It didn't completely show the world of the soul after death, and it made Amon feel very disgusted. Crazy Ol asked him to find a way to become a god. If one day Amon really became a god, one of the things he had to do was to destroy the underworld and build a real home for the undead. This was only the fantasy of a mere 5th-level magician, but who could stop a youth from realizing his dream? Kella probably didn't expect that Amon would have such a wish after escaping from the underworld. Even if Hades knew about it, it would only be a joke. She wouldn't take this little mortal seriously. Using magic to walk in the desert under the scorching sun was a continuous consumption of magic power. Only Amon had such a habit. After the experience of exhausting his power in the suburbs of Uruk, Amon knew how to control and adjust himself to avoid falling into that situation again. At noon, when the sun was at its strongest, Amon patted his waist. A cloud of mist flew out of nowhere and condensed into an ice crystal cloud above his head. It floated along with him but did not evaporate. It was like an umbrella that reflected the light. If only there was a covered carriage. His carriage was still left in the inn in Arcade. As soon as Amon thought of this, he saw a carriage coming. There was no such thing as a road in the desert, as long as one could walk on it. However, this carriage was running too fast. It was running all the way in the middle of the day, and the driver was whipping the horse repeatedly. Was he trying to tire the horse to death? It didn't take long for the carriage to cross the sand dunes ahead. When the driver saw Aman from afar, he was delighted at first, but then he realized that Aman was alone on foot. He shouted in disappointment, "The desert bandits are coming. Hide!" Aman grew up in Duk and often heard the stories of desert bandits from merchants who came to the town. The Saya Desert was the junction of the three kingdoms of Igut, Hittite and Babylon. It was also an important trade route between the kingdoms. Caravans carrying large amounts of goods passed through. Naturally, there were also bandits. It was said that the bandits in the desert came and went like the wind and were extremely fierce. If one encountered them, it was very difficult to keep them alive. Some people even called these bandits the desert tribe. This was a no-man's land, and the nearby terrain was very complicated. No one knew which kingdom the bandits came from. It was very difficult to clean up and track them down. Large caravans generally paid a lot of money to hire warriors as guards, and small caravans also hired bodyguards. But if they encountered a large group of bandits, they could only pray for their own luck. The driver was kind. He wanted to call for help from Aman, but he found that Aman could not save them. So he reminded Aman to hide. The bandits had not seen Aman yet. If they hid behind a sand dune or hid in the soft sand, they might be able to escape. Aman nodded to the driver and said, "Thank you for the reminder. Don't be afraid. I'll stop the bandits." He had heard the legend of desert bandits since he was a child, but this was the first time he had seen one. He was a little curious. Moreover, there was a chance to save people. Why not do a good deed? Aman waved his wand and the cloud above his head disappeared. He walked past the speeding carriage with a branch in his hand. Then he heard the sound of hooves. 2 people and 4 horses were chasing behind the sand dune in the distance. 2 bandits in black robes with their heads covered with cloaks were chasing after them on horseback. There was another horse running behind them. They held the reins in one hand and the bright scimitars in the other. As they chased, they shouted, "Damn fatty, don't run anymore. If you stick your head out, you'll get a knife no matter what. Just hand over all your money and I'll give you a quick death. Otherwise, I'll tie you up and throw you into the desert to dry." "Hey, brat, who are you?" The 2 bandits saw Aman suddenly appear after passing by the carriage. They were very surprised that such a person had come out of nowhere. He did not run or hide, but instead came to meet them. The horse ran very fast. In the time they spoke, they were in front of them. The bandit on the horse on the left casually slashed. He was used to killing people and did not even bother to ask who the other party was. In this kind of situation, whoever met him would die. The scimitar was made of fine iron. The blade was curved, which was very suitable for slashing and cutting with the force of the galloping horse. When the scimitar slashed at Aman, there was a faint layer of light on the blade. The range of the light was far beyond the length of the blade. This was a martial arts skill that only a level 5 warrior could have. No wonder the legendary desert people were so fierce. Aman did not die. He heard a crack. The branch in his hand met the saber. It did not collide with the blade. Instead, it passed through the light and hit the man's forearm that was holding the saber. Suddenly, there was a scream. The bandit's forearm was broken and the saber flew out of his hand. The branch did not stop. It directly flicked forward. The horse rushed forward, but the bandit was thrown into the air and fell heavily on the sand dune. The other bandit did not expect this at all. His horse had already run over. He was shocked and hurriedly turned around. He raised his saber and rushed towards Aman. Unfortunately, his horse stepped on the loose quicksand, and as it ran, its front hooves caved in, and it suddenly fell and rolled forward. The bandit was caught off guard and fell heavily under the rolling body of the horse. He did not know how many bones were broken. He groaned and fainted on the spot. Aman dealt with the two bandits. His movements were very fast. It took only a moment for the man and the horse to pass each other. He was also a level 5 warrior. Perhaps his martial arts skill on the warhorse was not as good as that of the bandit. He did not use any magic to deal with the first bandit. He only used the earth element magic, quicksand fall, to deal with the second. But the other party underestimated him too much. His first strike was completely careless. He did not expect Aman to be so calm and accurate. Aman had the experience of hunting in the mountains and capturing all the wild beasts that came like a tide. Although the two people rushed at him aggressively, they did not make him feel pressured. And the young Aman probably did not fully realize that he had unknowingly gained another temperament. He rarely felt fear and panic. All this may be related to the experience. He had seen the underworld. No matter how fierce the desert bandits were, how could they make Aman panic? The one who was extremely frightened was the level 5 warrior who fell from the sand dune. He raised his left hand and shouted, "Please forgive me, I did not know you were a lone hero. I did not come for you. I did not mean to offend you. If you let me go, I will give you a great reward. My warehouse is full of gold and silver. Hero, my benefactor, you must not let them go. They will come back with a large group of bandits to kill you. These two people are the leaders of the desert bandits. They killed everyone else in the caravan. Only the servant drove the carriage and took me here. Fortunately, I met you." A fat man ran from the distance, panting and sweating. When he looked back, the carriage had stopped. The horse that pulled the carriage was twitching and foaming at the mouth. After being whipped by the whip and galloping under the scorching sun, pulling a cart and two people, the horse finally died of exhaustion. If Aman had come a little later, they would have been killed. The frightened bandit saw the fat man and his eyes suddenly lit up. He pointed at him and shouted to Aman, "Hero, it's him. He has a lot of money on him. You might as well kill him. Then you will be rich. All the money on him will be yours. If you let me go, I, the night wolf, will give you double the reward. How much money does this fat man have on him? I will give you double the reward." This man was called the night wolf. Aman had actually heard his name before. The merchants who came to Duk mentioned him several times. It was said that this man ran amok in the desert with his 40 bandits. They were a very powerful group of roving bandits. Even the army sent by the city-state failed several times to hunt them down. The fat man was startled when he heard this and did not dare to walk any further. He trembled and shouted, "Benefactor, you have saved my life, I will definitely repay you heavily. As long as I return to Egypt, I can pay you 3 times the amount of money I have on me." Aman was so powerful that he killed 2 bandits in the blink of an eye. And he traveled alone in the desert. Who knew where he came from? Maybe he was also a lone bandit. If he had evil intentions, the fat man would also be unlucky in this deserted desert. Thinking of this, how could he not be afraid? The fat man also made a promise to thank Aman. Aman did not pay attention to the merchants and the bandits. He turned to the fat man and asked, "You want to go to Igut? And a carriage? Very good. May I ask who you are and what happened to you?" Aman's voice was not loud, but it had its own majesty. The fat man hurriedly bowed and said, "I am Sio, a merchant from Montefiore, Empire of Igut. I was transporting goods to Uruk in the Kingdom of Babylon to sell. On the way back, I encountered bandits. There were only 2 of them, but they killed the bodyguards and all the workers of my caravan. Only my slaves and I escaped here." Aman asked again, "Do you know Lescut Lee from Uruk for business?" Sio was overjoyed. He nodded repeatedly and said, "Yes, of course I know him. I sell many of my goods to him and often buy things from his shop. Are you his friend?" "Aman, we can be considered friends. I protected him once." Sio understood the moment he heard this. Aman was a warrior and used to be Lescut Li's bodyguard. He hurriedly took a few steps forward and said, "That's great. Then we are also friends. If you can protect me and return to Igut safely, I will thank you greatly." The bandits saw that the two were actually getting closer and shouted anxiously, "Hero, how can you trust a shameless merchant? They are even more untrustworthy than bandits. If you kill him, you can get a large sum of money right now. If you let me go, I guarantee that you will get another large sum of money. I, Night Wolf, am famous in the desert for keeping my word." However, Aman did not seem to hear Night Wolf's words. He pointed to the 4 horses around him and said to Sayo, "Take these horses. Hitch one to the carriage and lead the other 3 to the back. Let's go together. I happen to be going to Igut, so I can send you to Cape States on the way." After the 2 bandits dismounted, the 4 horses stood where they were, including the horse whose front hooves had caved in. It was not injured at all. The horse that Sayo used to pull the carriage had already collapsed. One horse was obviously not enough to carry 3 people on a long journey in the desert. The 2 horses that were not ridden were carrying leather bags on their backs. They were probably drinking water, which was necessary to travel in the desert. Without waiting for Sihathar's order, the coachman ran over and took the reins of the 4 horses and pulled them to the side of the carriage. He took off the leather bags from the backs of the horses and threw them into the carriage. Then, he put another horse on the shaft of the carriage and said respectfully, "My lord, the carriage is ready for you." Night Wolf sat on the sand dune and shouted, "Hero, you can't do this." Aman picked up the 2 scimitars on the ground and handed them to Sayo. "Take these and don't leave them behind." Sayo trembled, but he still carefully took them and asked in a low voice, "You are not going to kill these 2 bandits?" Aman shook his head and said, "I don't want to kill people." Night Wolf's leg was injured when he fell, and he struggled to stand up. He shouted, "Since you don't want to kill us, why did you take the horses and water? We will die of thirst in the desert." Aman walked to the carriage and slowly replied, "I didn't kill you only because I don't want to kill people, not because you don't deserve to die. You slashed at me like cutting grass. Did you ask who I am? Do you want me to save you? If you don't want to die of thirst in the desert, I have 2 suggestions. First, wait for the gods to save you. Second, commit suicide before you are baked by the sun. Give yourself a quick death." These words made Sayo shiver again. Aman was really ruthless. However, thinking about it carefully, it made sense. If he had not dodged the knife just now, Aman would have been a corpse in the wilderness. When they got on the carriage, Aman asked the driver, "What's your name?" The driver replied, "My name is Aesop, I am Master Sayo's slave." Aman nodded, "Aesop, you did a good job. Drive the carriage back." The carriage turned around. There were 3 horses tied to the back, and there were 3 people sitting on them. They drove towards the south. Sayo opened the curtain and looked at Night Wolf, who was gradually disappearing from his sight. He said, "He is dead." Aman said, "How do you know? Maybe someone will pass by and save them." "That's impossible. Ever since the Great Flood, the north of the desert has become a vast swamp. The land transportation has been cut off, and no one uses this trade route anymore. I had no choice but to go north because I was on the run." Sihathar shook his head. Aman nodded and said, "So that's how it is. Then they are indeed dead. That person is called Night Wolf. I have heard of his name. He has a lot of blood in the desert. He deserves to die like this." Sayo seemed to suddenly remember something. He slapped his forehead and said, "Benefactor, I have also heard of the name Night Wolf. He has been harassing the trade routes for many years. The governor of the Cape States, Sir Dick, has put a bounty on his head. If anyone can capture him alive or cut off his head and send it to the Cape States, there will be a huge bounty. You almost missed this opportunity." Aman did not order the carriage to go back. Instead, he pointed to the 2 machetes on the ground. "I am not interested in this money. If you want it, the machetes are under your feet. Go cut off his head and bring it back to the city. The bounty is yours. Sayo trembled again. I don't have the guts. If you don't want the bounty, then don't take it. Anyway, as long as we reach the Cape States, I will definitely thank you. The fat merchant looked somewhat regretful. He did not have the guts to cut off the head of a bandit. On the other hand, he did not dare to accept the bounty. Even if Night Wolf was dead, the bandits under him were still alive. If they knew that it was Sayo who killed Night Wolf, would they still be able to use this trade route in the future? The carriage continued to move forward. Sayo asked again, Benefactor, I still don't know where you are from and what is your name? Chapter 77. At dusk, they arrived at the place where Sayo's caravan was attacked. The camel was still tied to the carriage. Not far away, there were horses that had run away. More than 10 bodies were lying on the sand dunes, including several armed bodyguards. Night Wolf had killed so many people with just the 2 of them. They were indeed ferocious. Perhaps it was because the size of the caravan was not large, so the Night Wolf did not bring a large group of people. Unfortunately, they had run into Amon's hands. Amon ordered Aesop to stop the carriage inside. What an unfortunate encounter. We can't bring all their bodies back this time. Let's bury them properly first. That night, after burying the victims, the camel and the horses were taken away, but the other carriage was left behind. Amon split the carriage into many long wooden strips and stuck them into the sand dunes where the bodies were buried. It looked like a small forest, leaving a recognizable mark. When he and Aesop were doing all this, Sayo was watching. He did not want to destroy a carriage, but he did not stop them. Amon had a very strange discovery. The ability he obtained from the underworld did not disappear. He could still sense the emotional changes of the master and servant, but he had to enter a deep state of meditation. What was going on? Did he bring out this special ability from the underworld, or did some of the original ability he had awakened by chance? Amon did not think too much about it. The various magic he practiced was already an incredible power for ordinary people. Of course, it would be better to have one more. This time, Sayo was transporting goods to Uruk City. He did not bring many things back. He only had the cash he got from selling. That was why Night Wolf followed him so closely. He carried a bulging money bag in his arms. He was careful not to take it out along the way. Even when he slept, he hugged his arms. In the early morning of the next day, the 3 continued their journey. With a covered carriage, they could constantly change horses along the way. It was indeed much more convenient and comfortable. At noon, Amon held Schrödinger in his arms and took out a water bag to feed it water. He moistened his lips bit by bit and gently moistened it, as if he was feeding a baby. Sayo tried to strike up a conversation. You must be from the Igut. Only the people of the Igut would love cats so much. Cats are the symbol of the gods, and they are worshipped and loved. I have a few cats at home. If you like them, I can give you the best one. It can catch mice. Amon shook his head with a smile. Keep it for yourself. How can I snatch what others like? This cat isn't a pet. It's my friend. It's been sick recently. Then he asked a question that made Sayo very nervous. How much money did you bring this time? Did the robbers target you? Sihathar subconsciously folded his arms and shrank back. He replied, not much, just a dozen parangons. 10 parangons were hundreds of gold coins, which was a lot. But Amon knew that Sayo was lying. Even without detection magic, he could tell from Sayo's reaction and tone that the merchant was not telling the truth. In fact, Sayo had more than 25 parangons with him. Yesterday, he made the same promise as the robbers, which was to pay Amon 3 times the amount of money. That was at least 75 parangons, which was an unimaginable amount of money for ordinary people. When he came back to his senses, how could Sayo not feel the pain? So he spoke in a very serious tone. He was very anxious, afraid that Aman would see through him or insist on checking his money bag. Fortunately, Aman was just asking casually. Sayo breathed a sigh of relief. He felt that his back was already sweating. Aman could see Sayo's reaction clearly. He couldn't help but feel a little amused. Aman just wanted to save people. He didn't want to ask for the huge reward, nor did he want to blackmail this merchant. He was just playing with Sayo. This man was timid and stingy. He was always sweating, which was very funny. Most of the men in Duk were tall and strong. It was rare to see a man like this. At this time, Aman had just turned 16. He looked very mature, but he still had the temperament of a young man. What Aman did next surprised Sayo. He took out a delicate copper bottle from his leather bag, opened the stopper, held the cat in one hand, and put the mouth of the bottle to the cat's mouth with the other. He fed it little by little. The tempting aroma of wine wafted in the carriage. Even the driver, Aesop, couldn't help but take a deep breath. This was obviously the best wine. Aman bought this bottle in Somme. It was originally prepared for Schrödinger. At that time, he bought 2 bottles. Schrödinger drank one and left. Aman didn't touch the remaining bottle. He kept it in his leather bag, waiting for Schrödinger to come back and drink it. There was no wine in the carriage. Sayo, who had just recovered from the shock, felt a little hungry. He licked his lips and said with surprise and pity, "You actually fed such good wine to your cat?" Aman explained, "This cat is my friend. I know it likes to drink. The better the wine, the better it likes it." "We are also friends," said Sayo. Aman raised his eyes and looked at him. "I saved you. Do you feel sad about the huge reward you have to pay? Are you complaining that I fed wine to the cat but didn't treat you?" Aman was really straightforward. It was as if he could see through Sayo's thoughts at a glance. Sayo avoided Aman's eyes and replied in a panic, "No, of course not. As soon as we reach Cape States, I will pay you 30 parangons. I can't thank you enough." Aman smiled. He knew that his words just now were a little mischievous and made Sayo very uneasy. He lowered his head and continued to focus on feeding the cat. Schrödinger didn't seem to be really unconscious. It was just too lazy to move or open its eyes. When the wine was brought to its lips, it stuck out its pink tongue and licked its lips. It seemed to be enjoying the wine very much. It drank half a bottle of wine in a row before it let out a slight burp and snuggled its head in Aman's arms. It seemed to be asleep. It was the first time in 2 days that Aman saw the cat move. It seemed that it was recovering. He couldn't help but feel relieved. He put the remaining half bottle of wine back into his bag and left it for Schrödinger to drink tomorrow. Since Schrödinger could drink, he could feed it some meat soup at night. At dusk, Aman ordered the carriage to stop for a rest. He got out of the carriage and placed a pot in the sand dunes to make a pot of fragrant meat soup. After letting it cool, he brought the cat over and fed it a little. Schrödinger didn't eat as much as before, but it still closed its eyes and drank half a pot of meat soup before falling asleep again. This time, Aman wasn't stingy. He made a pot full of thick meat soup and invited Sayo and the driver, Aesop, to eat it together. Aesop was a slave and couldn't sit and eat with them. After Aman and Sayo finished eating, he thanked them profusely. The meat soup made by Aman was much more delicious than the dry food brought by the caravan. Sayo ate it with relish and praised it. It might not be as good as the food in the city, but where else could it be better in the desert? It was already dark after the meal. The starry sky above the desert was exceptionally beautiful and bright. Aman found a flat sand dune, sat down quietly and began to meditate. He had experienced so many things these days. Even if he had a trip to the underworld, he hadn't stopped meditating on the basics of magic for a single day. In the early hours of the morning, when the sky was just beginning to brighten, they continued their journey. Sayo looked at Ammonius curiously and asked cautiously, my benefactor, are you a mage? Aman asked calmly, why do you ask? Sayo explained, I saw you meditating under the starry sky for half the night. Only a noble mage would meditate like this, so I took the liberty to ask. If you are a mage, please forgive Sihathar's rudeness. Aman shook his head, no, I'm not a mage. At this time, Aesop sat on the shaft and explained, my lord, in my hometown and even further places, there are many people who like to meditate like this. They think about life, existence, and other esoteric questions. They are not mages. Sometimes, I also like to sit under the starry sky, feel everything with my soul, and think about all kinds of stories in the world. His words helped Aman out of the awkward situation. There was no need for further explanation. Needless to say, they met other caravans along the way. After a few days of trekking, the sand dunes gradually disappeared into the Gobi Desert. Shrubs and weeds grew in the Gobi Desert. Finally, they arrived at the border of the Empire of Igut, the Cape States. Aman wanted to take out the customs clearance document, but unexpectedly, entering the Igut was smoother than expected. Sayo had been on this road many times and was very familiar with the tax collectors and soldiers guarding the checkpoint. He paid the fee and entered directly. Aesop was his slave and Aman was his bodyguard. They entered the border without being checked. They didn't even need to prepare the documents. After entering the border, Sayo said to Aman with some embarrassment, we're already in the territory of Igut, but I have to go to Cape City to have a business. Only there can I pay you. What he meant was that he hoped Aman would continue to escort him until they reached the main city of Cape States. Aman smiled and said, I'm going to Cape City too. Let's go together. I heard that you're going straight back to Montefiore. I have something to do in Cape City. Let's part there. There was still a long way to go from the border checkpoint to the main city. Along the way, they passed by many villages and towns. The largest town was a port near the sea in the north. It had tens of thousands of residents and looked very prosperous. It was almost like a small city. Sayo explained to Aman that since the land communication with the Hittite kingdom of Saya was cut off by the flood, the trade between the two city-states relied on shipping, so the port town became prosperous. However, the trade of the entire city-state was somewhat affected. More than half of the 3 important trade routes had been lost. It was more convenient for the shipping trade between the Empire of Igut and the Hittite kingdom to depart from the ports of Montefiore at the mouth of the Nile River, so there was no need to make a detour to the Cape States. Cape States was currently a transit point for goods trade between the Kingdom of Babylon and the Hittite kingdom, and the land transportation between the Empire of Igut and the Kingdom of Babylon still passed through Cape States. A few days later, they finally entered Cape City. Aman saw the prosperity of the city with his own eyes. He had been to the capital of Babylon. Of course, he had seen everything there was to see. However, the atmosphere of the people was different from place to place. Most of the land in the Cape States was barren and not rich in agricultural and livestock products, but the trade was quite developed. Therefore, there were countless shops in the city, and one could see specialties, delicacies, and wines from all over the world. There were also entertainers performing in the streets and alleys. It was a dazzling sight. This was a city full of vitality, chaotic but rippling with vitality. It was very lively. Wandering through the streets and alleys, smelling the aroma of various delicacies, looking at the dazzling array of goods, and those who were enjoying fine wine and food, watching the performances of entertainers, or haggling over prices, there was a sense of vitality rushing towards them. If there was a person who was tired of the world and wanted to commit suicide, he should bring him to such a place to walk around and experience it. It was very likely to dispel the idea of suicide. Aman, who had just escaped from the gloomy mansion of the underworld not long ago, felt very good coming to this place. He had a tough temperament, but for a teenager, the things he had experienced were a little too heavy. He needed to relax in such a place. It was the age where he should be lively and cheerful. Sayo gave face to his savior. Not only did he arrange an inn for Aman, but he also let Aesop drive a carriage and take Aman around the city for 2 days, visiting all kinds of lively places. Although Aesop was a slave, he was very knowledgeable and had a stomach full of stories to tell. It was very interesting to have him as a guide. On the 3rd day, Sio invited Aman to the shop he opened in the Cape States. He asked the shopkeeper, Humbert, to count 30 parangons in front of him and put them on the counter. "My savior, this is your reward. Please don't be shy, you must accept it." Sio's expression and tone were as sincere as possible, but Aman could feel that his body was a little tense, as if he was grabbing something and trying to pull it back. He felt as if his heart was being clenched. Anyone who took out such a large amount of wealth would feel heartache. Aman didn't want to make things difficult for him. Why should he create a grudge after saving a person? He waved his hand and said in a calm and firm tone, "Sio, you should be glad that you are still alive, so you can continue to enjoy these things. But don't forget that the bodyguards and the people you hired are all dead. I will only take 10 parangons. Thank you for your reward. The rest of the money will be used as compensation for the families of the deceased." Sio was so moved that tears almost flowed down his cheeks. He took a few steps forward and grabbed Aman's arm. "Thank you, my savior. If you have time to pass by Montefiore, please come to my mansion. I will give you the best treatment." Aesop was also very moved. He picked up 10 parangons from the counter, knelt on the ground, and handed them to Aman with both hands. "Hero, I thank you on behalf of those unfortunate people. I pray for your bravery, integrity, generosity, and kindness." Aman took the parangons and put them in his pocket. In his excitement, Aesop had forgotten one thing. The law of the Empire of Igut also stated that slaves were not allowed to touch parangons. Every time they violated the law, one of their fingers would be cut off. However, Aesop had picked up 10 parangons at the same time. Without anyone noticing, the shopkeeper, Humbert, suddenly shouted, "Master Sio, Aesop has touched 10 parangons. This is a serious violation of the imperial law. He has used his sharp tongue to say and do things that are out of bounds. This is intolerable." No one would have thought that such a thing would happen in such a touching scene. Humbert's voice was so loud that everyone in the shop heard him. Aesop's face turned pale in an instant, but he bit his lips and said nothing. Aman was shocked. Looking at the slave, he suddenly remembered the scene when he was interrogated by Priest Shog in the town of Duk. Sio was obviously angry. He was very dissatisfied that Schubert had shouted out Aesop's mistake. "Why didn't you just pretend you didn't see it?" Aesop was a very capable slave. He was eloquent and knowledgeable. He was highly valued by Sio. Had it not been for Aesop's quick reflexes, Sio would have been dead by now. But under the watchful eyes of everyone, Humbert had spoken out loud. Sio could not openly violate the imperial law. Aman glanced at Humbert. He saw that when the shopkeeper looked at Aesop, there was anger and hatred in his heart, as well as gloating. Why was that? It was not hard to understand. Just like how Shog wanted to punish the innocent Aman, it was out of deep jealousy and hatred. Sio had suffered a great loss this time. Although it was all his master's money, it was also the losses of the shops in the Cape States. The 30 parangons just now were taken from the accounts of the shops here. As a slave, Aesop had become more and more important to his master in recent years. His status was even higher than that of the shopkeeper. Humbert had long disliked him, and Aesop had even mocked him several times. This time, Aesop had saved his master. Wouldn't he be even more restless in the future? Humbert had caught him at one of his mistakes. Of course he would punish him. Sio did not know what to do in front of the shopkeeper. He looked at Aman with pleading eyes. "Benefactor, what do you think of this slave?" He obviously did not want to cut off Aesop's fingers. Otherwise, he would not have asked. Slaves were also his wealth. Crippling a slave, especially the most capable one, was a loss. He could not bear to do it. Aman knew that he was not as eloquent as Aristotle, and the situation was completely different. He asked Aesop kindly, "If I want to keep your fingers, what reason do I need?" He wanted to hear how the slave would defend himself. If that did not work, he would buy the slave on the spot with a large sum of money. Aesop knelt on the ground and looked up. He tried to keep his voice calm and not trembling. "Master Sio, hero, it is true that the imperial law states that slaves cannot touch parangons, but there is another law. Slaves are the property of their masters. As long as there is no dispute with others, the master can decide how and when to deal with them." Sihathar nodded and said, "Yes, I am. But I cannot violate the laws of the empire. Everyone saw that you touched the god's stone." Aman asked, "What reason do you need to keep your fingers? Can you tell me a legitimate reason?" Chapter 78. Humbert interrupted, "Master, do you still want to listen to his excuses? Quickly punish this slave who violated the law. This is to protect the dignity of the master. Otherwise, more and more slaves will follow his example and violate the rules, not putting you, the master, in their eyes." Before Sio could speak, Aman raised his head and scolded, "Shut up and listen to Aesop's story." There was a strange majestic power in his voice that rushed into Humbert's mind. Humbert almost lost his balance, as if he was under some kind of pressure and could no longer speak. Aesop then began to tell the story of Pythagoras. Pythagoras was a mysterious sage. He was the son of a great noble. He was very rich, but he led his disciples to establish a community and lived a life of asceticism. He was also a very brilliant doctor, and it was said that he was also a supreme mage. Some even said that he had seen the gods and knew their secrets. Once, Pythagoras went out to buy the daily necessities of the community. Due to the large quantity, he paid 1 parangan at a time. When he opened his purse, he accidentally dropped the parangan on the ground. A slave beside him picked it up. At that time, the owner of the shop shouted, "Pythagoras, look at your slave." He touched the parangan with his hand. He should have 1 finger cut off. "I have a knife here, I can lend it to you." Pythagoras took the parangan and scolded the slave, "Copernicus, why did you accidentally touch the parangan again? Including this finger, how many fingers do you owe me now?" The slave named Copernicus replied, "Dear Master Pythagoras, including this time, I already owe you 13 fingers. Pythagoras waved his hand and called his follower over, "Write it down. Copernicus owes me 13 fingers. The shop owner was surprised and asked, "Pythagoras, aren't you going to cut off his fingers?" Pythagoras replied calmly, "According to the law, he should have his fingers cut off. But according to the law, he is my property. He did not have any disputes with others. I can decide when to cut off his fingers. Can't you see that I have already written it down?" The shop owner shouted, "But how can a person have 13 fingers? He only has 10 fingers, and you've already recorded 13 fingers." Pythagoras laughed coldly. "Ignorant and cruel man. How dare you be so greedy as to abuse others? Your greed has blinded you. From a mathematical point of view, there was nothing impossible. He had 10 fingers, and if he cut off 13 of them, he would be left with -3. This was just a negative number. If you don't understand, Copernicus, explain it to me." Copernicus explained, "Shopkeeper, if you have 10 gold coins and buy something worth 13 gold coins, how many gold coins would you have left? It's not that there isn't one. Mathematically speaking, it's -3. Do you understand?" That was the end of Aesop's story. His last words were, "Do you understand?" Nobody knew if the others understood, but Aman understood. He couldn't help but smile. Sio blinked and thought for a long time. Then, he suddenly realized, "Write it down. Aesop owes me a finger. I can decide when to cut it off." According to the two laws, this was just a simple evasion technique for masters to let their slaves go. However, the first person to come up with this idea was a genius. The person who followed suit was Sayo. Aesop bowed. "Thank you for your kindness, master. Aesop is your property." The finger on Aesop is also master's. The shop owner's face darkened. He wanted to refute but couldn't find the words to say. Amon had already received his payment. Sayo was ready to return to Montefiore after dealing with the aftermath. The two parted ways here. When they left, Amon saw Aesop setting up a carriage outside. He went over to greet him alone and thanked him for accompanying him around the city for the past 2 days. Finally, he asked, "Aesop, the story you just told me was about your early years. Have you really seen the faraway sage Pythagoras?" Aesop nodded respectfully. "Yes, I have. I was still very young at that time. I wasn't Master Sayo's slave." Amon asked, "You said that Pythagoras had seen the gods and even knew the secrets of the gods. Is this also true?" Aesop quickly explained, "How would I know? It's just a legend. The sage is very mysterious. There are many followers around him. Some people even say that he is the son of the gods. But legends are just legends." Amon nodded and asked with great interest, "So this person, where is he now?" Aesop pointed to the north. "From here to the seaside, then cross the ocean to the north. When you see the coast, go west. There is a peninsula surrounded by islands. There are many city-states there. It is called the Kingdom of Hellas. The last time I heard of Pythagoras, he led his disciples to build a secluded manor on the outskirts of the city of Croton. It is called the Pythagorean Manor." Amon made a mental note of this place. If he had the opportunity to travel far in the future, he could go there and try to ask Pythagoras for advice. He remembered that Aristotle, who had helped him in Duk, was also from the Kingdom of Hellas. That place was really worth a visit. He thanked Aesop. Aesop asked, "Benefactor, I just asked a question. Why do you thank me?" Amon replied, "Because the information you told me may be very useful to me." Aesop asked curiously, "Are you interested in the secrets of the gods? If that is the case, I have a suggestion." Amon was a little surprised. "Oh, what suggestion do you have?" Aesop pointed to the spire of the temple in the distance and said, "These are all illusory legends, including the gods themselves. In that case, you might as well ask the gods themselves. If they really appear in the human world, you might as well ask the gods themselves. If they really appear in the world. In the legends, the gods will also walk in the world in various identities. They will even stand in front of you and speak to you." Amon smiled and suddenly thought of Murin's shepherdess, Yun Namna. He smiled and said to Aesop, "Thank you for your suggestion. I will consider it." Aesop bowed deeply and said, "You saved my life. Just now, you also gave me a chance to speak. I have not expressed my gratitude yet. Why are you thanking me again?" "Amon, when I first met you, you shouted at me from the carriage, reminding me to hide. If I was just an ordinary passerby, your shout would have saved my life. In that case, it was not me who saved you, but you who saved me. When your own life was at stake, you did not forget to save the life of an innocent passerby, so I want to say thank you. Aesop, can I ask you another question? What is your deepest wish?" Aesop answered very seriously, "Freedom." "Amon, freedom. Do you want to get rid of the status of a slave?" Aesop, "Not exactly. Although I am a slave, when I look up at the starry sky, my heart can fly freely with wings. My body is not tied down by things, my heart is not bound by desires, and I am detached from existence. This is the freedom I yearn for." Not expecting a slave to say such words, Amon was slightly taken aback. He smiled and said, "The kind of freedom you are talking about, I am afraid only the gods can understand it. I have to say thank you again. Aesop, take care." Maybe one day you will reach the other side of freedom. Amon wanted to buy this slave and maybe try to give him the identity of a free person, but on the one hand, Sayo might not be willing to sell him, and on the other hand, it was really inconvenient for him to walk around the Igut with a slave, so he had to give up the idea for the time being. After saying goodbye, Amon returned to the inn to pack up his things and went straight to Rod Dick's mansion in the east of the city. He came to the luxurious mansion and said to the gatekeeper, "I come from afar, and I have an important matter to see Master Rod Dick." In front of the mansion stood 4 men who looked like gatekeepers, and next to them were 6 guards in bright armor. Amon didn't know who to look for, so he asked the one closest to him. The man lowered his head and glanced at Amon. "If there is something, you can go to the various offices of the city to apply for it. Unrelated people should not stay here at will. If you come to see Master Castellan for a small matter, is there anything else you can do?" This was the truth. If there was something to do, they should find a place to do it. If they all came to see Rod Dick directly, even if this Master Castellan was not annoyed to death, he would probably be busy to death. Amon explained very politely, "My matter is both official and private. I am afraid that the various offices of the city cannot handle it. I must see Master Castellan Dick himself. It is very important, please inform him." The other 3 gatekeepers also came over and said, "Foreigner, do you know the rules? Do you think Master Castellan is someone you can see just because you say so? Master Dick is not at home, and even if he is at home, he must inform the gatekeeper to let you wait. If you really have a very important matter, we dare not delay it. Please make it clear and show us the proof." Another person reminded in a low voice, "We can let you wait outside the door. When Master returns, we will let the second housekeeper inform you. If Master is willing, he will let you in. But if a small matter disturbs Master's rest, Master will be angry and we will all be reprimanded. We should at least reward you for your hard work, right?" Amon did not have the experience of asking to see a big shot like Rod Dick. Of course, it was not something he could see whenever he wanted to. If it was a distinguished guest, he was usually invited to a special guest hall to rest first, and Master Dick would only receive him after reporting. If ordinary strangers came to visit, if they really had something to do, they would have to wait outside the door and let the gatekeeper inform them. If they disturbed Master Dick's rest for no reason, the gatekeeper would also be reprimanded, so the man hinted to Amon that they would only bend the rules if he gave them a bribe. He did not know if Amon understood, but when the man was about to reach out his hand after saying this, he found that Amon had already turned around and left. He could not help but scold from behind, "Where did this wild boy come from? Making trouble in front of the Castellan's door, is he looking for fun?" It was not that Amon was reluctant to bribe the gatekeeper, but the encounter in front of the mansion made him change his mind. The mansion was deep, and once he walked in, the consequences would be unpredictable. He was not sure if Rod Dick was trustworthy, and Nero's relics were quite precious. If the Castellan had any other intentions, wouldn't it be troublesome if he detained him and the relics on the spot? It was not like he had not suffered such losses before. Amon could deal with several accidents, but in Rod Dick's mansion, he would not be able to escape with his ability. Amon turned around and went to the Temple of Horus located in the center of the city. He had already found out that Rod Dick, as the chief priest of Cape States, would host a sacrificial ceremony to the gods every month. The citizens of the city could visit and worship outside the temple hall, and today was just in time. He originally wanted to wait outside the mansion for Rod Dick to return home, but now he planned to go directly to the temple square and take out Nero's staff in public. When Amon arrived at the square, the sacrificial ceremony was already over. Several priests stood on the steps, and the crowd was like a tide coming out of the spacious and tall stone pillars in front of the temple gate. Rod Dick boarded the carriage with his entourage. There were guards in front of him, and the crowd automatically retreated to make way for the Castellan. He had already planned to return to his mansion. At this moment, a voice shouted, "Lord Rod Dick, I have come to return the staff and relics of the Supreme Mage Nero in accordance with the last words of the former chief priest of Cape States, Lord Nero. The voice was so loud that even the priests standing on the high steps heard it. Everyone was surprised and looked curiously in the direction of the voice. Someone whispered to the onlookers around him, "Who is Nero?" Another person explained, "Nero was the chief priest of the city more than 30 years ago, a supreme mage. It is said that he had died for the country." What's going on? After so many years, someone actually returned the staff of Lord Nero. In front of the guards of Lord Rod Dick, the crowd parted, but there was a young man standing still, holding a staff in his hand. He was the one who had just shouted. Someone stopped the convoy and raised his staff. The guards drew their weapons and were on guard. If it weren't for Amon's words just now, the guards would have taken him down by now. Rod Dick's carriage stopped. He lifted the curtain and walked down, followed by two people, both of whom Amon had seen before, the clerk Faal Judah and his aide Aristotle. As soon as Amon saw Rod Dick coming out, he knelt on one knee and raised his staff high above his head, making a gesture of offering. The guards breathed a sigh of relief. The crowd parted to form a circular open space, surrounding Rod Dick's convoy and Amon in the middle. Several priests of the shrine also hurriedly trotted over. Aristotle felt that Amon looked familiar at first glance, but he couldn't remember where he had seen him before. It wasn't that the young sage had a bad memory. In the past 2 years, Amon's appearance had changed too much. His facial features still vaguely resembled those of when he was young, but he had completely grown into an adult. Rod Dick was about to go over and ask in detail when Faal Judah pulled him back and said, "My lord, be careful. Let's figure out the situation first. What if it's an assassin?" Aristotle pulled at the hem of his robe, separated the guards, and walked to Amon. He asked in a pleasant tone, "Young man, why are you standing in front of the governor's caravan with your staff raised high?" Amon replied loudly, "As I said just now, according to the last words of the former chief priest of the city, the supreme mage Nero, I am here to return his staff and relics. It is said that this staff contains the message left by Lord Nero. Please examine it, Lord Rod Dick." Aristotle reached out to take the staff and asked again, "What is your name? How did you get the relics of Lord Nero?" Amon replied, "I am a hunter deep in the mountains. My name is Amon. When I was chasing prey, I found the words written in the cave. It was left by the former chief priest of the Cape States, the supreme mage Nero. He hoped that someone could find his relics and return them to the Cape States, return the staff to the shrine, return the relics to the family, and promise a reward. I came all the way through the mountains and the desert to fulfill the last wish of the deceased." "Amon? Your name is Amon?" Aristotle was slightly startled. He seemed to remember something, but he did not say anything. He turned around and walked back with the staff. Several priests of the shrine had already run down the long stairs and came to Rod Dick's side. One of the older priests looked at the staff in Aristotle's hand and said with a trembling voice, This is really the staff of the chief priest of the Cape States. Lord Nero took it with him 30 years ago and never returned. I didn't expect to see it again." The handle of the staff was made of yellowish-brown wood. The texture was very strong and durable. There was no sign of decay at all. The top of the staff was inlaid with a turoculus. No one knew how it was made, but the turoculus seemed to have grown naturally in the grain of the wood. Only a few sharp edges could be seen. The onlookers could see it clearly. Anyone who had seen it before could recognize at a glance that it was indeed the staff used by Nero. The foreigner who came all the way here did not lie. Rod Dick took the staff. He could not help but tremble with excitement. This staff belonged to the shrine of the Cape States. Only the chief priest was qualified to hold it. After Nero disappeared, the staff was also lost. The next chief priest was Rod Dick's father, Old Dick. A few years ago, Rod Dick succeeded as the chief priest. Although he found another skilled craftsman to forge the staff, it was certainly not as precious as the staff that had been passed down from generation to generation. He did not expect it to return today. Was it a gift from the gods? It was returned to the Cape States by a foreigner. Rod Dick personally received it in front of the shrine in front of thousands of people. The symbolic meaning of this was extremely important. Rod Dick had been in officialdom for a long time, so his reaction was quite fast. He took the staff and raised it above his head with both hands. He turned towards the direction of the shrine and knelt down. "Thank you, Horus. Thank you, great God. Under your guidance, the staff of the previous chief priests has returned to the city." As soon as the governor knelt down, everyone followed suit. For a moment, there was no one left standing in the huge square. Everyone was thanking the gods. The voices of thousands of people were like a tsunami. Seeing this scene, Amon knew that he had done the right thing. Returning the staff in public was the best choice. Chapter 79. Rod Dick had the skill of a wise politician. He was able to steer an unexpected event in the most advantageous direction. There was no script for this scene in advance, but if it was designed by a dramatist, the best effect could not be more than this. When he received the staff and heard the cheers of the crowd, the prestige of the gods also increased the prestige of the lord of the city. Amon, who was kneeling at the back of the guards, was supposed to be the most important person, but now he seemed to have become a minor character. After thanking the god, Rod Dick stood up and led the crowd to Amon. He lifted Amon up with one hand and asked, "Hero, where did you find the last words and relics of Lord Nero? Can you tell me in detail?" Amon answered, "Deep in the mountains on the west bank of the Euphrates River. Only wild beasts roam there. I was chasing a wild beast when I lost my footing and fell off a cliff. That's how I saw it. There are some words in a cave under the cliff, along with a staff and a ring." As he spoke, he took out the ring and handed it back to Rod Dick. Rod Dick's hand sank slightly. This ring was not light at all. Clearly, it was a spatial artifact that could store items. Rod Dick was a 6th-level warrior and had learned elementary magic. However, he didn't have the ability to use a spatial artifact. He could feel the weight of the ring in his hand, but he didn't know what was inside. Faal Judah asked, "Amon, you're a hunter. How can you read?" Amon didn't have a good impression of this clerk. He answered calmly, "I'm a hunter, but my grandfather wasn't. He was a clerk who was punished." Faal Judah frowned and asked again, "The mountains on the west bank of the Euphrates River should be in the territory of the Hittite kingdom. You're a Hittite. Even if you can read, how can you read an igut?" Amon explained naturally, Master Nero's last words were written in 2 languages. Of course, he couldn't tell the whole truth. It was actually the story of Madanzo's great-grandfather's last words that Crazy Ol saw in the mountains. Amon just borrowed it and changed it to Master Nero's last words. Bear's message in the mysterious cave was written in 2 languages. Facing Judah's question, Amon answered without hesitation. As for Nero's last words, they were completely true. Amon didn't make up anything else. The Taraculus inlaid on the wand contained the message left by Nero. As long as Rod Dick asked someone to verify it, it would be clear that it couldn't be faked. However, he couldn't say that he had read the message, because that would expose his identity as a sorcerer. There were different languages in different countries on the continent, but their languages were similar. Amon didn't hide his identity as a foreigner, because his accent still had traces of it. Rod Dick realized that it wasn't the right place to ask too many questions, and it wasn't the right time to talk in front of the crowd. He took Amon's arm and said, "You've come from afar. Let's not talk in the square. Let's talk in the temple." Lord Dick didn't go home in the afternoon. He changed his mind and went back to the temple of Horus. The crowd followed him up the long stone steps. The crowd was still cheering. Faal Judah walked behind them. He felt that Amon's accent was very familiar. It left a deep impression in his memory. He looked at Amon's back. Although he was standing beside Lord Roddick and surrounded by the nobles, the boy's steps were steady and his back was straight. He didn't look nervous at all. Fayal Judah suddenly remembered something. 2 years ago, in the remote and desolate town of Duk, one of Fayal Judah's proudest deeds was that he took the god's tear away as soon as possible, which made Lord Roddick's plan to elect the adoratress a success. It didn't matter who the miner was. The Parangan of Duk must have been found by a miner. It was just his luck. But Fayal always remembered that when he walked into the low house, the boy with the sledgehammer didn't kneel at first. He stood straight in front of the anvil, just like that. But at that time, he hadn't grown up yet. Judah could not forget the 3 sentences the young man had said to him at that time. "Who are you? How can you come in like this? When you mine a Parangan, you have to stand to swing the hammer. Otherwise, how can you see it being taken out in one piece? My name is Amon. People here call me Amon." Yes, that's him. The name the boy told Aristotle was Amon. Fayal Judah shouted in his mind. He finally recognized Amon. He was the young miner who mined the god's tear in Duk. He thought he would never see him again. Now, he was walking with Lord Drick holding his arm in the cheers of the people. Should he tell Lord Drick? If he had said it out loud, Amon would have received even more gratitude. But Fayal Judah was worried about one thing. Lord Drick had given him 30 gold coins as a token of appreciation for the miner, but he had only given Amon 30 silver coins. This was a trivial matter. No one would blame a clerk for pocketing his own money. But now that this matter had been exposed, Fayal Judah would be too ashamed to face anyone. Many so-called trivial matters were like this. They seemed insignificant, but when they were exposed, it was a stain on one's noble character. Listening to the cheers of the people, Fayal Judah would never be able to raise his head again if they talked about the past. Does Amon still remember me? Fayal Judah thought to himself. He hoped that Amon had already forgotten. However, Judah's rationality told him that it was impossible. If he was in the miner's shoes, he would never forget that scene. Would Amon talk about the past later? He hoped that he wouldn't. Even if he did, there was no need to talk about the small details of the 30 silver coins. Last time, Amon had received the god's tear, Lord Drick had thanked Mayor Dusty. But this time, it would be Amon himself who would receive the reward. Returning the chief priest's staff in front of the people in the temple square was a perfect scene. Compared to the reward he would receive, 30 silver coins was not worth mentioning. This child must not know that Roddick had given him 30 gold coins. Fayal Judah kept comforting himself. At the same time, Judas thought that this child was too lucky. He was the one who mined the god's tear and made Roddick's plans succeed. Today, he was the one who returned Nero's lost staff in public, making Roddick's reputation reach a new peak. He was like a god who cared for Roddick. Why did all the good things happen to a lowly miner? This was too unfair. Wasn't the town of Duk destroyed by the flood and no one survived? Why was he still alive? No one knew how many thoughts were surging in Fayal Judah's mind. The long steps in front of the shrine seemed so long. The weather was not hot, but Judas's forehead was oozing sweat. Not only did Fayal Judah recognize Amon, but Aristotle also recognized him. He was the one who saved the child in the square and sent him to the adoratress Maria as a servant for 3 days. But when Amon saw that Roddick did not mention the past, nor did he show any sign that he knew Aristotle, he obviously did not want to talk about it anymore. Moreover, Amon's appearance had indeed changed a lot. He was almost unrecognizable. It was said that Duk had been destroyed by the flood, so this surviving child must have gone through too many hardships. It was normal that he did not want to talk about the past. Everyone had a secret that they did not want to talk about. As long as he did not talk about it, Aristotle would not point it out. After all, it was Amon's own business. Aristotle also sighed with emotion. This young miner named Ammon was really like a god who cared for Rod Dick. He not only mined the god's tear at the right time, but also returned the oracle's staff at the right time. As Rod Dick's most valued and trusted aide, Aristotle knew very well what the young castellan was worried about all this time. The empire of Igut was powerful, but the Cape States on the northeast border were relatively weak. Once the neighboring kingdom of Babylon and the Hittite kingdom started a war, the Cape States would be in a passive position. The Uruk city of Babylon was guarded by the great hero Gilgamesh and the greatest warrior on the continent, Enkidu. No one dared to attack them. But what if they attacked the empire of Igut in the west? How could the Cape States defend against them? The relationship between the kingdom of Babylon and the empire of Igut was relatively peaceful. For the time being, there was not much danger of war. But on the other hand, the Hittite kingdom might be in danger. On the surface, the Hittite kingdom had submitted to the empire of Igut for many years, but it was precisely because of their dissatisfaction with this fate that they had been accumulating strength to resist. A great flood cut off the land transportation and temporarily saved the Cape States, but the flood would not last forever. The soldiers of the city of Saya were well equipped, and most importantly, they were united. It was said that the chief priest, Goliath, led the people to protect the city and later became a 9th-level supreme mage. His reputation in Saya was unparalleled and he was even more powerful than the gods. This kind of unity was the most terrible weapon in the chaos of war. It could make people sacrifice their lives for a single goal. In the battle of thousands of soldiers and horses, the personal strength of the top masters of the continent, such as Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and Goliath, might not be the decisive factor. Their real strength lay in their rallying power and unity among the people. In contrast, although Rod Dick was also a talented governor, he could not reach that level. That was why when Ammon returned the staff in public, Rod Dick was so excited that even the hands of the governor, who had always been calm, were trembling slightly. The powerful empire and the relatively weak city-states were strategically important and faced with the potential threat of war. This was what worried Rod Dick the most. One could not blame the governor for thinking so far ahead. Once something happened, he could not escape. Not only was he the governor, but his family's territory for generations was also in the Cape States. On the other hand, the power of an individual was not the absolute factor in winning against thousands of soldiers and horses, but it was also a symbol and a guarantee of stability. After the death of Nero, there had been no supreme mage in the Cape States for more than 30 years. Compared to the Uruk of Babylon and the Saya of Hittite, the Cape States were at a clear disadvantage. Since Maria became the adoratress, she had gradually mastered some of the important affairs of the Temple of Isis in Montefiore. Rod Dick had repeatedly applied to send a supreme mage to the Cape Shrine, but there had been no response. Not long ago, the adoratress finally sent a message that an 8th-level supreme mage would be sent to inspect the shrine in the border. Rod Dick was ready to take this opportunity to invite the supreme mage to stay and serve as the chief priest of the Cape States. But how should he bring this up? Who would want to leave the prosperous and comfortable Montefiore to live in Cape? An 8th-level supreme mage could live comfortably anywhere. Coincidentally, the day before the supreme mage's arrival, the staff of the chief priest was miraculously returned, giving Rod Dick a good excuse and opportunity to make a request. Naturally, Ammon did not know that he had come to the Cape under such a complicated background. In fact, he had always had a good impression of Rod Dick. It was precisely because of the governor's arrival that Ammon had the opportunity to meet Eco. Therefore, there was always an inexplicable sense of gratitude in his heart. It was this governor who had once sent Eco to his side. The shrines in the Cape States were much more magnificent than the Temple of Horus in Duk. Upon entering the main hall, the first thing Ammon did was to pay his respects to the statue of Horus in the center. For the first time, Ammon carefully looked at this legendary god. Although there was also a temple of Horus in Duk, it was only a symbol of submission to the empire of Igut. Usually, no one would voluntarily offer sacrifices to it. The statue of Horus here was more than 50 feet tall. Its arms were folded in front of its chest, and behind its shoulders hung a pair of huge wings. The human body was carved with the head of an eagle, and its eyes were even sharper than the beak of an eagle. According to legend, the incarnation of Horus was a divine eagle that roamed the heavens, so the craftsman created such a statue. The huge statue exuded an indescribable sense of oppression. Everyone involuntarily bowed as soon as they entered the shrine. After paying his respects to the god, Ammon was invited to sit down in a side hall. Sitting among a group of noble lords, Ammon did not seem too flattered. He had talked face to face with the princess of the kingdom, and he had even walked on the grassland with a goddess in his arms. This kind of scene was nothing to him. Rod Dick was a little surprised. He smiled and said, "Our righteous Ammon, you have an unusual temperament. You are firm and calm. Even when sitting beside the noble lords, you do not panic at all. This is very rare for a young man." Ammon bowed and explained, "I have been hunting ferocious beasts in the dangerous mountains. I have experienced countless life and death situations. I rarely feel panic now." Rod Dick said, "Oh, I see. It is fate that has shaped you. You discovered Master Nero's last words while hunting. Can you tell me the details?" Ammon then changed the time and characters of Crazy Old Story, and retold Nero's last words and the course of events. Finally, he explained, "I read the words on the cave. Master Nero hoped that someone could find his relics and return them to Cape States. The staff should be returned to the shrine, and the ring should be returned to his family according to his will." He did not repeat the words of the Taraculus, but he did not hide what he had obtained either. He told Rod Dick about the 3 scrolls. After all, Rod Dick only needed to check the message and he would know. Rod Dick was very interested and asked, "May I ask if you have brought the 3 scrolls? I don't mean anything else. It is a reward from Master Nero, so it is yours. I am just curious." Ammon could not take out the 3 scrolls, and he did not want to take them out, not to mention that 2 of them had already been used up. He replied regretfully, "I only found out about Lord Nero's last words when I fell off the cliff. The mountain road was very dangerous. When I got out of the difficult situation, I accidentally cut my bag by the thorns and lost the 3 scrolls. Fortunately, I still have the staff and the ring." Rod Dick sighed and said, "What a blessing in misfortune. Don't be sad, I will thank you greatly. Please wait a moment, we are going to check the message left in the staff." It was not difficult to check the message left in the staff, as long as one had mastered advanced message magic. They did not do it in front of Ammon. Nero's message was very important, and it might involve some secrets. It was not suitable for a foreigner to know. In a small meditation room in the shrine, Rod Dick handed the staff to the oldest priest. There were not only the governors of the city, the 3 high priests of the shrine, but also the heirs of the Ramos family. Nero was just a name. As a full-time priest who dedicated himself to the gods, he used the name registered in the shrine's directory. People no longer called him by his family name. Nero was born in the Ramos family, a great noble family in the Cape States. Nero himself had no children, but there were 9 adult nephews in the family. They should also be present. Rod Dick was very thoughtful and sent horses to pick up all the people who could be picked up. When the priest raised the staff, Nero's voice from more than 30 years ago echoed in the meditation room again. "Whoever is lucky enough to come here and pick up my staff, please listen to my last words. I am Nero, the chief priest of the Cape States of the Empire of Igut, a 7th-level supreme mage. When you return the staff to the Shrine of Cape, please find Lord Dick and ask him to invite a supreme mage who is proficient in advanced spatial magic to take out the will from the ring and read it in public. Lord Dick is trustworthy." After listening to the last words, everyone's expression changed. Nero's last words involved some secrets, including his doubts and hesitations about the gods when he was facing death. These were not suitable to be made public. The Igut government had already made a conclusion about Bayer's past 30 years ago, and the details were not allowed to be spread to the outside world. Although Nero claimed in his last words that he did not betray the gods, it was detrimental to his reputation after his death and the impact on the hearts of the people of the city. Chapter 80. The priest replied, "I can only read the message but not erase it. Only a supreme mage can do it. Tomorrow, the high priest of the Montefiore shrine, Lord Julian, will arrive in Cape States. My lord, you can ask him for help." Roddick nodded and said, "Our esteemed supreme mage Nero said some things he should not have said before he died, but he remained absolutely loyal to the gods and the empire, and gave his life for it. Everyone here must understand that what you have heard today must not be leaked, or you will become a traitor to the entire city." Everyone nodded silently. There were indeed some words in Nero's last words that could not be leaked, mainly these: "In this world, the gods are not the only ones who have will." I was surprised at where Bayer's strength and courage came from. When he passed through Cape States, I tried to persuade him to return to the embrace of the shrine, but I did not keep him. Bayer told me that mortals can also become gods. In this regard, the gods have deceived everyone, and we are all deceived. Great Horus, I admit that I am very curious. I once said to Bayer, "Do not tempt me. I have long since rejected the temptation of the devil." But is the temptation of becoming a god really the devil in people's hearts? I hope to get the answer, even at the last moment of my life. Did Bayer also destroy himself because of this temptation? I wanted to see Bayer confirm the answer, so I let him and Trony leave the border of Igut. Although I could not stop him alone, I did not use all my strength to stop him. He is my clansman and my benefactor. I could not make up my mind to challenge him with all my courage. Roddick knew the stakes and gave a strict order on the spot. In fact, Amon was more or less aware of it. He did not mention this when he described the contents of the text he saw in the cave. However, Amon was not a member of the bureaucracy of the Empire of Igut, so he did not see it as a serious problem. He only omitted some inappropriate words to avoid trouble. Everyone was silent for a while. Finally, it was Nero's eldest nephew, the current head of the Ramsey family, Obama Ramsey, who could not help but speak first. "I want to know what my uncle left us, and where is his will?" Roddick took out the ring and put it on the table. He smiled bitterly and said, "The will and things are in this ring. This ring itself is also a precious interspatial artifact. It's something your family inherited. Unfortunately, none of us can open it. We can only wait until Lord Julian of Montefiore arrives tomorrow and ask him to deal with it." The nephews of the Ramos family stared at the ring, unable to conceal the burning desire in their eyes. The Ramsey family was very rich. They were once the second largest noble family in the Cape States, second only to the Drick family. As the chief priest of the city, Nero once had absolute authority over all the wealth of the family, but he was a prodigal son when he was young. The hobby of making scrolls was not something that ordinary people could afford. Not only did it consume a lot of effort and magic power, but it also consumed a lot of wealth. Many of the materials used to make scrolls were quite expensive, and some of them could not even be bought. After Nero became a supreme mage at a young age, 40 years of his life, endless efforts, and countless wealth were used by him to satisfy his hobby of making scrolls. Because of this, the family's wealth had shrunk greatly. Although it could not be said to be in decline, it was far from being as powerful as before. Especially after Nero's disappearance, the Ramos family did not have any outstanding talents, and was now just an ordinary noble family. But when Nero made scrolls himself, it was no longer a matter of losing money. On the contrary, it became a means of accumulating a huge amount of wealth. Because of this, he became the best scroll maker in the whole of Igut. Of course, all the work of making scrolls was not done by Nero alone. He could mobilize the power of the city and the shrines to complete the preparation of various materials and auxiliary work for him. In return, he would leave some scrolls to the city and the shrines. But on the other hand, he also made a large number of personal scrolls, such as the 3 scrolls he gave to Ammon. These scrolls were priceless. Almost all the mages on the continent, as long as they had enough money, would be willing to buy them at a high price. The only fear was that Nero would not be willing to sell them. Only when those who were particularly close to him came to him for help would Nero transfer some scrolls or promise to make them for him. Even the Academy of Igut, after receiving the scrolls from Nero, spent a lot of money to order a batch of scrolls from him. When Nero chased after Bear, he set out in secret. The situation was very urgent. He left behind everything that belonged to the shrines except for the staff. He also left behind a number of personal belongings. But later, when the shrines and the descendants of his family checked his belongings, they thought that the number of personal belongings of Nero was obviously not right. Some of his personal belongings should have been taken away. Of course, those things should be very valuable. Now that they saw the space ring that was lost and found, the descendants were eager to know how much wealth was contained in it. Hearing Rod Dick's words, they were more or less disappointed, but they had no choice but to wait. Obama hesitated for a moment and asked again, "This ring belongs to my family. Can I temporarily take care of it on behalf of my family?" Before Rod Dick could say anything, Fayal Judah scolded, "The ring will be returned to you sooner or later. But the things inside have not been taken out, and the will has not been read. Of course, it should be kept by the governor. This is also the last will of Lord Nero." "What, you don't trust the governor?" Obama Wellington hurriedly explained, "No, I didn't mean that. It would be best if the city lord kept it. I'm just worried about that outsider. The ring has been in his hands for a long time. Could it be that the item inside has already been taken out?" The oldest priest shook his head and said, "The most brilliant mages in the city are here. None of us can open this ring. Can a hunter in the mountains open it?" Rod Dick faintly added, "Just this ring and this staff are already unimaginably valuable. If they really wanted to take something for themselves, would they return it to you?" Obama muttered, "Maybe it's because he can't open the ring and wants a huge reward from my uncle. That's why he returned it. Aren't there 3 scrolls? Why haven't we seen them? My uncle's last will was very clear. One of the scrolls is more valuable than the ring and the staff combined. What else does he want?" Rod Dick explained, "He hasn't asked for anything yet. Why are you worried about what he wants? Everything will be done according to the will. I will definitely handle it fairly. I've asked him about the scrolls. He lost them when he escaped from danger in the mountains. A hunter in the mountains may not know the value of those scrolls." Nero's youngest nephew, Hilary, suddenly screamed, "What? He lost the most precious scroll left by my grandfather." Rod Dick finally showed an impatient expression, "That's his scroll, the reward promised by Lord Nero. Losing it is his own loss, not yours." The last words that Ammon saw did not mention how precious those scrolls were. "We only read the message in the staff." This was supposed to be an explanation, but it turned into a reminder. Hilary suddenly thought of something and said excitedly, "Yes, the message. The lord of the city ordered us not to leak Uncle's message, but who knows what that man called Ammon saw in the cave." Rod Dick waved his hand, "I've asked him in detail. There was nothing to worry about in the message he saw. It was just some instructions from Lord Nero before he died." Hilary seemed to have found something. She leaned forward and said, "How can we believe this? Even if he saw it, he wouldn't tell the Lord. Those words can't be spread by a foreigner. I think we should put him under house arrest and interrogate him before we decide what to do with him." Rod Dick's face darkened. Aristotle was the first to scold him, "What a stupid and rude idea. That foreign boy named Ammon traveled thousands of miles to return Lord Nero's precious relics. It is enough to show his noble and selfless character. It is also a symbol of God's care for the Lord and the Cape States. He returned the staff and the ring in front of everyone, showing his trust in Lord Dick. Didn't you see the scene of the people cheering? If we don't treat him with respect, it will seriously hurt the prestige of the late Lord Nero, your Ramos family, Lord Drick, the entire Cape States, and the gods." Hilary didn't say anything. Roddick nodded and said slowly, "I won't allow anyone to do anything that will damage the prestige of the Cape States. Before Lord Nero's will and relics are dealt with, that foreigner is staying in my house. We should show our gratitude and not treat him rudely. Otherwise, who would be willing to trust me, the lord of the city?" When Roddick returned to the side hall where Amon was staying, he smiled and said, "Amon, we need the help of a supreme mage to retrieve Lord Nero's will and relics. It will take a few days, and you must be present as a witness. Where do you live? I'll send someone to fetch your luggage. You can stay in my house for the next few days." "Amon, I'm staying in an inn. I don't have much luggage, just a few old clothes and a sick cat." "Roddick, please rest assured, your cat will also receive the best care. If you need anything, just ask the servants in the house." The invitation of the lord of the city was also in order. Amon couldn't refuse. At the same time, he was also very curious about Nero's relics, so he followed Roddick to the lord's house. This time, it was completely different from the time when he went alone at noon. Roddick invited him to ride in the same carriage. When the gatekeepers saw Amon coming down from the carriage of the lord of the city, they were so surprised that they couldn't believe their eyes. P.S. At almost 5:00 this afternoon, there was a sudden power outage at home. I looked at the computer and sighed. Fortunately, there was still half of the manuscript in the USB drive. I rushed to the office to rewrite it, and barely managed to update it today. Therefore, the number of words in this chapter is a little short. Please forgive me. Chapter 81. Inheritance. They then asked Sir Dick's attendants and found out that it was Amon who returned Nero's staff in front of everyone in the temple square. They couldn't help but gasp. Amon was now a distinguished guest of the city. If they told Sir Dick about what happened in front of the mansion, they would be kicked out. They trembled in fear and wanted to apologize to Amon in private, but unfortunately, they didn't have the chance. Thankfully, what the gatekeepers were worried about didn't happen. It seemed that Amon didn't tell Sir Dick about what happened when he visited the mansion. Instead, the second butler who was in charge of guarding the gate heard about it and called the gatekeepers to reprimand them in private. They missed such a great opportunity that was delivered to their doorstep. When Amon moved into the mansion, Roddick arranged a separate small courtyard for him. Everything he ate, wore, and used was luxurious that Amon had never seen before. It was the first time in his life that he had such luxury. However, he didn't see Roddick for several days. The governor was busy with official business these days. Roddick didn't restrict Amon's freedom of movement. Other than the inner residence, he could go in and out as he pleased and receive guests. However, every time he went out, the butler would send a carriage and guards to accompany him. This was a kind of protection and a kind of surveillance. Now, he couldn't let Amon go. Amon didn't need to pay when he went to the shops. He could buy whatever he wanted, and someone would keep tabs and pay for it. After Amon bought a few fun little things, he realized this and consciously did not buy anything else. After all, living in the governor's mansion, he did not lack anything. In this strange foreign land, he received 2 gifts in a row. The first gift was given by the gatekeepers when he went out. It was a special snack made by them and wine bought from the shops. They were apologizing and asking Amon not to complain. Amon didn't want anything from them, but he still accepted it with a smile. He could feel their hearts. If he didn't accept the gift, it would make them anxious. But if he accepted it, it would make them feel relieved and grateful. The second gift was given by the second eldest nephew of Nero, Tashin Ramington. This noble personally came to visit and expressed his gratitude on behalf of the Ramington family. He also apologized for not receiving Amon in person these few days. The gifts were simple and practical: 100 gold coins, 2 horses, and a luxurious carriage. The carriage didn't have the decorations of the nobles, so it could be used by commoners. There were also a few sets of clothes and 2 young and beautiful female slaves. The clothes were good. The coat, underwear, belt, pocket, and boots were all a set. It wasn't as luxurious as a noble's clothing, but it was very comfortable and durable. It was very suitable for people on a long journey. Judging from the fine stitches and exquisite cutting, it couldn't be bought in ordinary shops. Except for the female slaves, Aman accepted everything else and was happy to express his gratitude. Aman didn't know what happened in the shrine that day. Bama was unreasonably hostile to him, and Hilary even wanted to imprison him for interrogation. Tashin was a sensible man. He sent the gifts to the residents of the Ramington family for everyone to see. This also represented the respect and sincerity of the Ramington family. Although it was only a private act, it saved the face of the whole family. Aman didn't see Rod Dick for a few days. He also asked his attendants what the Ramington family was busy with. He learned that the 8th level Supreme Mage Julian of Montefiore had come to visit. He actually met another acquaintance here. Aman naturally didn't know this Supreme Mage, but Julian was an old friend of Bear. There was a list of people in Crazy Ole's message, telling Aman that if he encountered any trouble on the continent, he could go to these people for help. These people had been helped by Nietzsche or Bear. Crazy Ole's keepsake was once Bear's keepsake, and Julian was on that list. 30 years ago, Julian was still a 6th level mage, in charge of the archives of the Temple of Isis. Bear often read all kinds of ancient books and materials, so he became familiar with Julian and received some help from Julian. The relationship between the two was very good. Advancing from the 6th level to the 7th level was the most difficult threshold to cross in the practice of magic. Julian had received a lot of guidance from Bear, which was quite a rare favor. Later, when Bear committed a crime and left the Temple of Isis with Trony, the first person to notice was Julian. But he didn't stop them, nor did he warn them at the first time. Maybe it was because of Bear's kindness, or because he knew that he couldn't stop Bear. There were 3 teams that went after Bear. The one from Montefiore was supposed to be led by Julian, but Julie found an excuse not to go. Instead, a high priest from the Montefiore shrine led the team to the city of Straits to meet with Nero to hunt down Bear. Like the shrines of each city, the Temple of Isis also had 3 high priests in charge of various affairs, but the chief priest was the Adoratress, who had a high status in the Empire of Igut. Since the Temple of Isis ruled the shrines of the cities of Igut, the high priests had a high status and were on an equal footing with the lords of each city. But there were only 3 high priests. Although Bear was a supreme mage, he was just an honorary high priest with no real power at first. It was not until he became the founding member of the Academy of Magic of Igut that Bear gained a high status. As the saying goes, every carrot has its own pit. It was precisely because the original high priest disappeared while hunting down Bear that Julian, who later became a supreme mage, became the new high priest of the Temple of Isis. In a sense, Bear indirectly helped Julian. Crazy Ole mentioned Julian in his message, but at the same time, he reminded Aman that after so many years, people's hearts were still unknown. If he really encountered any trouble and wanted to ask for help, he must first figure out the situation. Aman had nothing to ask Julian for help at the moment, but he was very interested in this supreme mage and wanted to see with his own eyes how he took out Nero's relics from the space ring, so he waited patiently. He was not in a hurry, but his nephews of the Ramos family were anxious these days. When Julian came to Straits, Rod Dick did not mention Nero at the first moment. Instead, he gave her a grand welcome and warm hospitality. Julian went to the various shrines of the city for inspection. In fact, it was just for show. Along the way, she was warmly received and received generous gifts prepared in advance by the shrines. Each place had its own characteristics, and there were many treats that were not available in Montefiore. This kind of inspection was also a rare pleasure, and Lord Julian felt very comfortable. Lord Rodick was so enthusiastic that he accompanied her all the way and gave Julian the highest level of courtesy. He did not go home for several days and temporarily put aside other affairs in the city. But on the way out with Julian, Rodick received a secret letter from his envoy in Montefiore, explaining the background of the inspection and a message from the adoratress. Maria also asked Rodick to find a way to keep Julian in straits. The reason was a bit complicated. After more than 30 years, the Temple of Isis finally had a new adoratress. Most people were happy, but there were also a few who were dissatisfied. The first was the Lord of Montefiore, the capital of Lower Igut. Without the adoratress, everything in the city would be decided by the Lord himself. But with the adoratress, all important matters had to be consulted by the adoratress, and the Lord's personal power was greatly weakened. The other people who might be dissatisfied were the 3 high priests of the Temple of Isis, and the reason was the same. Without the adoratress, all the real power of the Temple of Isis would continue to be controlled by the 3 of them. At the same time, they would also be in charge of the temples in the cities where Igut belonged. Julian was also one of the 3 high priests in charge. There was also a practical contradiction in this situation. If the Temple of Isis did not have the adoratress for a long time, the authority of the affairs of Igut would gradually be weakened and shaken. Therefore, this situation could not continue for a long time, and a new adoratress must be selected. But the 3 high priests did not want their real power to be weakened, so they hoped that the new adoratress would just be a symbolic decoration, and everything else would still be under their control. Maria was young and inexperienced. In her first year as the adoratress, she devoted herself to practicing magic and familiarizing herself with the various situations in the Temple of Isis, so there was no conflict. However, in her position, it was impossible for Maria to forever be a saintess who did not care about anything, nor could she forever be manipulated by others as a puppet. She was also talented and intelligent, otherwise she would not have been able to master the power bestowed by the gods in such a short time in Duk. Recently, Maria had gradually begun to take charge of some affairs of the temple independently. Changing and rectifying the old habits of the 30 years was a top priority. It just so happened that Rodick had repeatedly sent people to apply for a supreme mage to guard the Cape States. Maria took this opportunity. She sent Julian, the most greedy of the 3 high priests, to the Cape States to inspect. Inspecting the cities was a good job, and Julian came happily. But according to the secret report received by Rodick, the adoratress would send another order in a few days, ordering Julian to stay in the Cape States for a year and supervise the affairs of the border shrines. The order also reprimanded Rodick, criticizing the governor for his various omissions in the affairs of the shrine in the past few years, and asked him to respectfully and humbly accept the guidance and supervision of Lord Julian. Although the adoratress reprimanded Rodick in the order, the governor was secretly happy after hearing the news. First, she sent Julian to the Cape States, and then ordered him to stay, so that the high priest would not have the opportunity to oppose her. On the surface, the adoratress' order must be obeyed. Although it was not a very clever move, it was very effective. A year's time was enough for Maria to appoint new people to familiarize themselves with the things Julian was originally in charge of, even if everything was back on track by the time Julian returned. And Rodick also had a year's time to let Julian familiarize and adapt to the Cape States, looking for various opportunities to ask him to officially stay. Maybe after a year, when Maria was able to control the situation, she would issue an official order directly appointing Julian as the chief priest of the Cape States, and then select another trusted aide to fill the vacant position of the high priest. After receiving the secret letter, Rodick was no longer in a hurry, and just accompanied Julian on a happy sightseeing tour. They toured the territory of the city, and a few days later returned to the main city of Cape. Rodick was about to tell her about Nero's relics, but unexpectedly Julian spoke first. "My lord, I heard from the priests a few days ago that the best scroll maker in Igut, Nero, was the chief priest here." Just a few days ago, a foreigner returned Nero's staff and relics in public. "Why didn't you mention this to me?" Rodick clapped his hands and said, I was just about to say that the chief priest's staff, which had been lost for more than 30 years, returned exactly the day before Lord Julian's arrival, as if to welcome you, my lord. This is a symbol of the gods' care for Lord Julian. Julian didn't hear Roddick's implied meaning, but the words were very useful. He smiled happily and said, I heard that not only was there a staff, but Nero also left behind a relic. What is it? I'm also very curious. Roddick looked happy and said, I was looking for an opportunity to ask for your help, but my lord has been busy these days, so I have been too embarrassed to ask. It's a shame to say that there is no supreme mage in Cape, and none of us can open the space ring to take out the will and relics, so I have to trouble my lord to help. Julian laughed and waved his hand. It's no trouble, it's just a small matter, I'm happy to help. Where is the space ring? Bring it to me now. Roddick leaned over and whispered, My lord, don't worry, there's one more thing I want to tell you in private. He whispered a few words beside Julian. Julian was surprised and replied, Oh, there's such a thing. Then quickly bring the staff, let's go to the secret chamber of the shrine. In the secret chamber of the shrine, Julian held the staff in his hand and read Nero's last words, his face solemn, and he was silent for a long time. He didn't speak, and neither did Roddick. After a long time, Julian once again activated the Taroculus and listened to the last words from beginning to end again. Then the message in the Taroculus gradually weakened until it was inaudible, having been erased by the Supreme Mage without batting an eyelid. Julian said solemnly to Roddick, Nero's last words involve many secrets, they must not be leaked, I wonder who has read this message. Roddick bowed and replied, They are all related and trustworthy. For the sake of Nero himself, for the city, for the temple of Isis, for the honor and prestige of the entire empire of Igut, I have strictly ordered everyone not to leak it, otherwise they will suffer the most severe punishment. Now that this message has been erased, even if someone were to speak about it, it would never be acknowledged. Julian asked again, What about the foreigner who returned the staff? What does he know? We must be careful with this man. Roddick explained, he only saw the letter left by Lord Nero in the cave, and did not mention the past that should not be made public. Now this man is living in my mansion, and his entry and exit are monitored. After thinking about it, he added worriedly, This man's act of returning the staff and the relics has been regarded by the people of the city as a symbol of the gods' favor and gift. Just before your arrival, this also symbolizes your honor, so it is not good for us to be rude to this man, and we must express our due gratitude. Julian smiled and shook her head. Lord Dick, you worry too much, I just want to meet this man and praise his noble and selfless character in person. Roddick, you can see him tomorrow, and he will be present when the relics are taken out and the will is read. That night, Roddick returned to his mansion for the first time in several days. That night, Julian stayed in the room that belonged to the chief priest of the shrine, but she couldn't sleep. Roddick did not know that the supreme mage had his own concerns and desires. The foreign boy named Amon should be the only person in the world who had seen the last relics of Nero. Julian thought that the secret of more than 30 years ago would never be discovered again. She did not know how many words Nero had left behind, and whether there was any mention of what had happened between him and Bear. This was what worried Julian the most. On the other hand, Nero said in the message that Bear had told him that mortals could also become gods. This sounded unbelievable, but it had to be believed. What kind of temptation could make a 9th-level supreme mage leave the shrine and become the enemy of the entire empire? And Trony, the adoratress, was actually willing to go with him? Maybe Bear really knew something, and Nero disappeared while chasing after Bear, so he should be the last person to see Bear. Maybe he also knew something. There was no relevant information mentioned in the message left on the staff. If there was such content, it was likely to be in Bear's note in the cave, and even if the foreign boy saw it, he would not say anything, no one would say anything. The next day, Amon rode in the carriage of the lord of the city to the shrine of Cape States. In a solemn hall at the back of the shrine, everyone was present. Lord Julian sat in the middle, with a ring on the round table in front of him. The high priest of the shrine of Cape States, the chief deacons, the 9 nephews of the Ramos family, and Amon were all gathered around the table, while Rod Dick sat next to Julian as a witness. In front of an 8th-level supreme mage, Amon did not dare to use detection magic to pry into what was going on. He just stared intently at the spatial ring. The result was a little disappointing. There was no new discovery. Julian just picked up the ring, closed his eyes, and with a gentle shake of his hand, the contents were taken out. This was similar to Amon taking things out of the bone. He took out everything in the ring at once. Amon sensed that this supreme mage was using advanced spatial magic, and his magic power was very strong. It seemed that Nero's spatial ring was far less precious than Amon's bone. Even a 3rd-level mage who had just mastered spatial magic could barely use that rib. Everything was taken out of the spatial ring, and with a crash, it instantly filled half the table. Everyone let out a stifled gasp, and most of them held their breath. There were only 2 things left behind by Nero, a variety of scrolls and a pile of scattered parangons. At a glance, there were estimated to be more than 70 scrolls, nearly half of which were advanced magic scrolls. There were also hundreds of parangons, among which there were 4 aquaticore and 2 flame sprites. What an amazing wealth! Special parangons were expensive enough, but the value of scrolls was far greater than parangons. As a supreme mage, Julian naturally knew that. He was so surprised that he almost jumped up. Hilary, on the other hand, almost fainted from the shock. Her eyes were fixed on the aquaticore and the flame sprites. Rod Dick, on the other hand, was the calmest. He coughed softly and reached out to pick up a scroll from the table. After opening it, he glanced at it and said, "This is Lord Nero's will. It says, 'Read and notarized by Lord Roderick,' which should refer to my father. I didn't expect to see it after so many years. Thank you, Lord Nero, for your trust. I will read it today." Nero's will was very simple. He divided all the scrolls into 5 parts, 2 to the shrines in the Cape States, which was his contribution as the chief priest, 2 to the heir of his family, in the hope that there would be an outstanding mage in the Ramos family to inherit his career, and the last to the person who returned the scrolls, which was a token of appreciation for his selfless and noble character. The parangons were divided into 3 parts, 2 for the Ramos family, and 1 for the person who returned the scrolls. Nero's reward was very generous, but from another point of view, it was also reasonable. If the person who returned the scrolls did not return them, he could keep them all for himself. At the end of the will, there was one more thing mentioned. He hoped that the chief judge of the Cape States could make an exception and let the person who returned the scrolls have access to his personal records of making the scrolls. He also specified which article it was. Presumably, it was to explain the use of the nameless gray scroll. This was Nero's intention. In his message, he once said that the gray scroll was more precious than the staff and the ring combined, but only after returning the relic could one know how to use the scroll. He was worried that the person who got the relic would not return it. After the will was read, Rod Dick handed the scroll to everyone and asked them to read it. However, Amon did not read it at all, because he had already said in advance that he did not know Igut's cursive script. Amon lamented in his heart. He felt that the distribution in the will was too unfair. He did not know Amon, and he was a lowly foreigner, but he got more than any of Nero's nephews. But in front of everyone, he could not say no. So he pointed to the parangons and said, "I don't know the value of the scrolls, but I do know the number of parangons. There are a total of 103 parangons here. If we divide them into 3 parts, each part will have 34 parangons, and there is 1 extra. Amon, you take the 35 parangons and leave the blue and red ones." Rod Dick frowned and glanced at him. A contemptuous sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Tushuan Ramos said, "Cousin, don't you feel ashamed to say that? The value of special parangons is completely different from that of ordinary ones. Everyone here knows this. Since Uncle's will was notarized by Lord Dick, the distribution of the parangons should also be decided by Lord Dick. Rod Dick did not say anything. He would not count the parangons himself. He asked the clerk, Fayal Judah, to stand up and count the total value of the parangons on the spot. The value of the special parangons was different. The most valuable was the ventuscule. Because it could be used to make spatial objects, it was very rare, and it was worth 500 ordinary parangons. The Taraculus was worth 300 ordinary parangons. The flame sprite and the aquaticore in Nero's belongings were worth 200 ordinary parangons. There were a total of 97 ordinary parangons, for aquaticore, and 2 flame sprites. The total value was 1,297 parangons. If they were divided into 3 parts, each part would have 432 ordinary parangons, and there was 1 extra. After the clerk finished counting, Rod Dick first asked Amon, generous and selfless foreigner, how do you want this reward? Amon was also stunned. He did not expect Nero's belongings to be so valuable. He mainly wanted the scrolls, but he could not show it. Hearing the mayor's question, he answered, these colored parangons are so valuable that I don't want too much. I just want a red one and a blue one. It's convenient to carry them around. Forget about the small change. Thank you to the servants in the mayor's mansion. Lord Dick, please give them to me. Thank them for taking good care of me these days. Amon was straightforward and beautiful. He only asked for 1 aquaticore and 1 flame sprite. The reason he gave was also very reasonable, it was convenient to carry them around. No matter who it was, it would not be easy to carry more than 400 parangons on a journey. If they were exchanged for gold coins, one person would not be able to carry all of them. One would have to use a carriage. Amon generously gave the remaining 32 parangons to the servants in the mayor's mansion. Rod Dick was very satisfied. Amon took all the servants in the mayor's mansion with him. No one could object. Tushuan Ramzan also took the initiative to say, the Ramzan family should also take out double the odd sum, a total of 64 parangons, and let the lord of the city reward his aides and servants as thanks for notarizing the will. The remaining 801 parangons can be divided into 9 parts. Each of us can take 89 parangons. Several of Nero's nephews secretly glared at Tushuan, but no one openly objected. Thus, the parangons were divided. Next was the distribution of the scrolls. Rod Dick said humbly to Julian, my dear lord, you are a supreme mage. You know the use and value of the scrolls best. I don't have the ability to distinguish them so clearly, so please be the judge. Julian looked at the scrolls with a look of desire in her eyes. She smiled bitterly and said, the value of the scrolls is not as clear as the parangons. Sometimes they cannot be bought with money. In different situations and in the hands of different people, the meaning of the scrolls is completely different. Since it is not easy to calculate, I think we should use the simplest method. Here are 36 supreme scrolls and 38 intermediate scrolls. They will be divided into 5 parts according to the number. The mayor will represent the Shrine of Cape and take the first 2 parts. The Ramos family will take the second 2 parts. The outsider Amon will take the last one. As for the small change, the mayor will decide what to do with it. Chapter 82. I only ask for one thing. Rod Dick glanced at Aria, then looked around and said, I have a simpler way. Regardless of whether it's a high-level scroll or a low-level scroll, divide it into 5 portions, and each portion will have 6 scrolls. As for the rest, consider it as a token of gratitude to our respected Supreme Mage Julian. If Lord Julian had not opened the ring, none of us would have been able to get the relic. Is there anyone who would object? He was an experienced man. He had long known that Julian wanted these scrolls, so he gave the Supreme Mage 6 Supreme Scrolls and 8 Intermediate Scrolls, making Julian submit to him. Why not do something generous at the expense of others? The Ramos family and Amon did not dare to object. Amon naturally would not object. No matter what he got, it would be an unexpected gain. The nephews of the Ramos family did not dare to object either. Rod Dick made the final decision. He casually divided the scrolls on the table into 5 portions, each containing 6 supreme scrolls and 6 intermediate scrolls. He personally handed the rest to Julian. Julian was overjoyed. He thanked Amon and accepted the scrolls with a smile. These scrolls were the wealth of the empire's most outstanding scroll maker, Nero. As the high priest of the Temple of Isis, although Julian was very rich, the value of this batch of scrolls was at least 7 or 8 years of his total income. What's more, he might not be able to buy it even if he had the money. Rod Dick took 2 portions on behalf of the Cape States and ordered his people to keep them safe. The nephews of the Ramos family took 2 portions. Amon took the last portion and carefully put it in a bag he carried with him. Julian looked at Amon and muttered in his heart. His first impression was that this outsider was very difficult to buy over. Although in the eyes of this lord, almost everyone could be valued by their own interests, the price to buy over Amon was too high. This was because this outsider already had an astonishing amount of wealth, and he did not seem greedy. Otherwise, he would not have returned the staff to the Cape States. How was he supposed to deal with this man? Since it was difficult to tempt him, he could only threaten him or try using other methods. Before Julian could say anything, Obama muttered, "There are 9 people and 24 scrolls. How are we going to divide them?" Rod Dick replied with a smile, "That's not a problem. If you don't want to keep the scrolls and want money, I'll buy some in the name of the Shrine of Cape. I'll also buy some personally. Buying so many scrolls at once will cost an astonishing amount of money. I naturally won't let you suffer a loss, but you don't need to be so calculative." Hillary said happily, "As long as the city lord offers a fair price, why would we care? Let's exchange the scrolls for money and it'll be easier to divide them." Tessiang shook his head, "I want to keep some of my uncle's scrolls as a memento of my family. I'm willing to buy some from you at the same price as the city lord. But I don't have that much money at the moment, so I can only buy a few." Rod Dick smiled, "I almost forgot that there are 2 mages among you. Of course the scrolls will be useful. If anyone wants to buy the scrolls from us, you can bid first. These belong to the Ramos family anyway. I won't fight for them." Tessiang hurriedly explained, No. How would I dare to bid in front of the city lord? I'll bid whatever the city lord bids. Let's exchange all the scrolls for money. Besides my own share, I'll buy a few more." In the end, Tessiang paid a sum of money to keep 2 advanced scrolls and 3 intermediate scrolls. The rest of the scrolls were bought by Drick. Most of the scrolls were bought by the church, and a small portion was bought by Drick himself. Rod Dick knew very well that the value of these scrolls was not only in money, but also in the fact that they could allow a low or advanced mage to cast advanced and supreme magic instantaneously without consuming his own magic power. If any conflict broke out in the future, the scrolls stored in the city would be a great weapon for both offense and defense. Julian looked at Rod Dick again and thought to himself, "This city lord is really quick." He bought the scrolls from the Ramos family at the first opportunity, using the wealth of the city stored in the shrine. Could it be that the city lord was preparing for battle? If one day, 2 armies were to face each other, sending a group of mages with scrolls to launch a surprise attack would have the effect of winning the battle. On second thought, Julian thought of another possibility. It wasn't easy to come across such scrolls in normal times. The Ramos family sold them in large quantities at once. They didn't even carefully distinguish the use of each scroll. They only sold them at the prices of advanced and intermediate scrolls. Although Rod Dick paid a huge sum of money, the price he got was very cheap compared to other situations. Rod Dick then used his identity and connections to read the scroll-making notes left by Nero and privately sold them to the mages in a large city. He could definitely sell them at a much higher price than today's purchase price. The more Julian thought about it, the more she admired and envied the city lord. She regretted that she had acted too late. Then she thought about Aman again. After the scrolls were sold, Julian coughed and said, "There is one last item in Lord Nero's will. It's to let the person who returns the scroll read one of his personal notes. It's about the making of a certain scroll. Aman, do you want to read it? By the way, where is the scroll? Do you have it with you?" Wasn't he asking the obvious? Aman had already said that the 3 scrolls were lost in the mountains and could not be found. Aman looked up at Julian and suddenly became alert. There was an indescribable danger in the eyes of the supreme mage. It was like a mouse being stared at by a cat. Aman had brought out a special ability from the underworld that allowed him to sense the changes in people's emotions. Although he didn't know the exact thoughts of Julian, he could sense that Julian was up to no good. He replied very cautiously, "I have already reported to the Castellan that Lord Nero did leave behind 3 scrolls, but I lost them deep in the mountains when I escaped from danger, and I can't find them anymore. I won't read the records. I can't understand them anyway. There's no need to read them." Although he wanted to know the specific purpose of the gray nameless scroll, he simply cut off the idea in this situation. A commoner who didn't know magic couldn't use scrolls in the first place. Besides, the scrolls had been lost. If he still wanted to read the records written in Igut's hieroglyphs, it would be suspicious. The people sitting here were a group of cats, and he was the mouse in the middle of the cats. The notary of the will, Rod Dick, saw that Aman didn't want to read Nero's private notes anymore. He didn't force him and asked kindly, "Aman, Lord Nero's last wish has been fulfilled. As the city lord of Cape States, I should express my gratitude for your actions. What do you want in return?" Aman shook his head and said, "I have already received too much. Lord Nero's gift is beyond my imagination. How can I dare to ask for more? I only have one request, City Lord." "Rod Dick, just say it. As long as I can do it, I will definitely satisfy you." Aman showed a worried and embarrassed expression. "I know that the staff is very valuable, but I didn't expect Lord Nero's relic to be so precious. To be honest, when I came here, I carefully hid the staff and didn't dare to let anyone know. Now that I have so much money and valuable things on me, I'm a little worried. Can you let me leave the Cape States safely?" It was a little rude to ask this in public, but it was normal for a stranger to have such worries. Rod Dick's face slightly sank. "What are you talking about? The city should be thanking you. Why would we make things difficult for you? Lord Nero's will has been fulfilled. You can leave whenever you want. If you're worried, I can send guards to escort you." Aman smiled like a child. "Thank you, my lord. That's what I wanted. There's no need for guards to escort me. The city under Lord Drick's rule is the safest place. I want to leave today. When I return to my hometown, I will be the richest man in the city." Aman said he wanted to leave. Rod Dick had already said it in public, so it was not good for him to take it back. It was understandable that a stranger would be eager to return to his hometown after suddenly obtaining an astonishing amount of wealth in a strange city. Julian wanted to find an excuse to detain Aman, but he did not expect Aman to make such a request in public. The supreme mage rolled his eyes and said with a smile, "Aman, your noble and selfless conduct should be praised and rewarded. Can I ask you a few questions in private?" Aman's scalp tingled at his laughter, but he could only nod and said, "Of course, my lord. Please ask me anything." Julian took him into a quiet room and went straight to the point. "Aman, I'm very interested in Lord Nero's last words in the cave and the scroll you lost in the mountains. Can you tell me the specific location and process in as much detail as possible?" If Aman had made it up completely, it would inevitably reveal many flaws in his story in front of this astute supreme mage. But this experience was not made up by Aman himself. It was a paraphrase of Crazy Old's story and Nero's last words. He calmly told it again from beginning to end. After that, Julian ordered someone to bring him a pen and paper, and asked Aman to write down as much as possible of the handwriting he saw in the cave. Aman wrote it again, not revealing anything that should not have been revealed. Julian then asked Aman to draw a map and asked him how to find the place. Aman explained, there are many places in the mountains with no roads, and the terrain is very complicated. It's almost impossible to remember it accurately. I'll try my best to draw it for you. He really did draw a map of the deep mountains and forests of the Euphrates Valley. The terrain was quite complicated, and the slightest deviation in the strokes would probably cause a huge gap. It was almost impossible to find the exact place based on this map. But it was already very good for a mountain hunter to draw it. He respectfully handed the sketch to Julian. Julian was still worried and suddenly asked, "Didn't Nero mention bear in his last words?" Aman looked up and asked, "Who's bear?" Julian shook her head, "It's fine if you don't know this person, but did he mention the gods in his last words?" In fact, he wanted to ask about the secrets of the gods, but it was not appropriate to ask directly, so he could only beat around the bush. Aman asked curiously, "No, the last words I saw were all written to you just now." Julian frowned. As the chief priest of the city, how could Nero not mention the gods in his last words? "Aman, are you hiding something?" "As long as you tell me, I won't blame you." Aman scratched the back of his head, "How would I know? I'm just a mountain hunter, you must know more than I do." Julian stared at Aman, as if trying to see through him. Aman suddenly found that he could not sense the Supreme Mage's emotions. He must be in a state of meditation and had restrained the information emitted from his body and mind. Julian's magic was much better than Aman's. In front of him, Aman's special ability lost its effect. This discovery made Aman even more vigilant. He was sure that the Supreme Mage was suspicious of him and had other intentions. Crazy Ole's message mentioned this Julian and said that Julian was indebted to Bear. If he encountered any trouble, he could take out the token and ask him for help, but he had to figure out the situation first. In this situation, Aman did not dare to take out the token, lest Julian find out that he had something to do with Bear. Julian looked at Aman and suddenly smiled, "You're just a mountain hunter. The scrolls you got today are of no use to you. They can't be eaten or opened, but they are very useful to a mage like me. But for a mage like me, it's very useful. I'm willing to pay a high price for it. Can you sell it to me at the price Drick just offered?" Aman did not want to agree, nor could he refuse. It was indeed useless for a mountain hunter to keep magic scrolls, but on the other hand, scrolls were not only scrolls, but also very valuable. He thought for a moment, blinked his eyes and replied, "Dear Supreme Mage, in my hometown, buying one item at a time is much more expensive than buying a lot. The more expensive the item, the more expensive it is. Parangons can't be eaten or opened, but they are money, and so are the scrolls. What do you think? If we go to a big place with many mages and sell these scrolls in batches, wouldn't we be able to sell them for a higher price? I'm not short of money anyway, so I'm not in a hurry. Isn't that better? I know you are a noble man, but please tell this ignorant hunter, am I right?" Julian sighed in his heart. This Aman looked simple, but he was not stupid at all. He was already somewhat sure that Aman must be hiding something and needed to be interrogated. Even if it meant torture, he must extract valuable clues from the boy's mouth. If Aman knew about his past with Bear, even if there was a trace of possibility, he could not stay in this world. Since Aman had asked this question, Julian really could not say that his idea was wrong. He could only smile and say, "Aman, you are very smart, and even more rare, honest and selfless. You are indeed a good boy worthy of praise. I heard you say that you are leaving today. I wish you a safe journey, and the gods will protect you." As he said this, Julian had already made a decision. It would not be good to do anything to Aman in public, but after Aman left the city, he would intercept him in a secluded place and interrogate him secretly. Because the matter he wanted to ask was of great importance, the Supreme Mage even wanted to do it himself. Anyway, his tour of the Cape States had ended and he would leave tomorrow. He would have to do something on the way, and no one could question him. Even if he rode a fast horse, it would still take him several days to leave the Cape States. No matter what, Amon would not be able to escape the hands of the Supreme Mage. When the time came, he would use all means to interrogate him. No matter what, he must not let Amon live. Julian was thinking so and was about to bring Amon back to the hall to say a few words of encouragement and praise, when suddenly he heard someone outside reporting loudly, "Lord Julian, the latest edict of the Adoratress has been sent to the Cape States. It is for you and Lord Drick." Julian was taken aback. He had completed his tour and was going back tomorrow. Why did the young Adoratress, Maria, give the latest edict at this time? Did something major happen? He hurriedly tidied up his clothes and went to the main hall to receive the edict of the Adoratress. Lord Drick led a group of officials from the city and the shrine to get ready respectfully. Rod Dick was already aware of the edict of the Adoratress. He tactfully reprimanded the young governor for his shortcomings in handling the affairs of the shrine and praised the achievements and talents of the high priest Julian. He ordered Julian to stay in the Cape States for a year to guide and supervise the affairs of the shrine. This order was far beyond Julian's expectations. He had just obtained a batch of precious scrolls in the Cape States today. He was in a good mood, but suddenly he felt as if he had been hit by a stick. The order had been officially issued, and he naturally could not openly disobey it. He did not want to stay in the Cape States for a year, and he was afraid that something bad would happen if he stayed far away from the Temple of Isis. It seemed that he could only send a letter back to Montefiore to discuss with the other two high priests and find an excuse to ask the Adoratress to transfer him back in advance due to an urgent matter. There was also a small problem ahead. He was afraid that he could not kill Amon himself. He could only send someone else. As for the interrogation and killing, he must let his most trusted confidant do it. This secret could not be leaked in the slightest. The messenger who came to deliver the order was the deputy director of the archives of Montefiore. He was also a prominent lord. Rod Dick naturally had to entertain him well. At the same time, he also planned to hold a grand banquet to thank and welcome Lord Julian for staying in the city. From afternoon until late at night, the officials of the city were very busy. The governor was once again too busy to go home. Of course, no one had the time to care about Amon. What Amon did not know was that Maria had given him the order at the right time. It could be said that she had saved him this time. Julian, the Supreme Mage, did not have the time and opportunity to capture him personally. But he himself was prudent enough to leave Cape that afternoon, in the carriage which Tashin Wellington had sent him, with his few belongings and a cat. The servants in Rod Dick's mansion were a little reluctant to see the young man go, because they had heard that Amon had given the governor a huge sum of 32 parangons. Everyone could get a large sum of money, especially the gatekeepers who led Amon's carriage all the way to the intersection. They even watched him leave with tears in their eyes. Chapter 83. That night, after the grand banquet, Rod Dick was tired, so he stayed in the backyard of the shrine to rest. The shrine was not just a shrine. It was the largest building complex in the city. There were also many courtyards and garden-like buildings for the priests to live in. Lord Aria took the opportunity to meet several more people in private after the banquet ended. Among them were the oldest priest of the Shrine of Cape, Judah Fayal, the clerk of Rod Drick, Obama, the current patriarch of the Ramos family, and Hillary, Obama's youngest brother, among others. It was an honor to be summoned by Lord Julian alone. The content of the conversation was not open to the public, but it was more or less related to Amon. Julian asked the oldest priest who was present when Nero's last words were first read. He asked Fayal Judah about what Amon had reported to Rod Dick. He carefully compared what Amon had said to him to see if there were any discrepancies. If there were discrepancies when Amon talked about how he obtained Nero's relic twice, it would be suspicious. Judah Fayal took the opportunity to say, "I don't think that foreigner is simple. He has been staying in the inn for several days and could have delivered the staff to Lord Drick's mansion at any time. But he waited until the day of the monthly shrine festival to stop the carriage of the lord of the city in front of everyone. What a cunning man! I suspect that he did not tell the whole truth. He must have seen something else in the last words of Lord Nero, or he got something else. Julian said quietly, "Do you think we should investigate this matter? He is not from Igut. If he really knows something that he shouldn't know, it will be very troublesome to announce it in a foreign country." Judah Fayal had his own selfish motives. Hearing these words, he couldn't help but think of a way to please him. The best way is to ask him himself, of course, or make him unable to talk forever. But this must not be made public, or it will affect the reputation of the lord of the city and you. Julian glanced at Fayal and changed the topic. "I'm just asking, I don't want to do anything. But I see that Obama and Hillary are very dissatisfied with Amon, right?" Fayal Judah nodded. "Yes, they have suggested that the lord of the city should imprison Amon for interrogation, but Lord Dick rebuked them." Julian smiled. Lord Dick is wise. He should have rebuked such a rude and stupid suggestion. How could he let the lord of the city ruin his own reputation? As a ruler, his reputation among the people is priceless, so he can order and forbid them. Let Obama and Hillary come in. I'll be staying in Cape for a long time. I may need your help in many things in the future. Judah nodded repeatedly. "It is Judah's honor to be of service to you, my lord." Julian then summoned the two nephews of the Ramos family and chatted about some irrelevant gossip. She expressed her condolences to the Ramos family and congratulated them for finally obtaining the relic of their ancestor after more than 30 years. Then, she expressed her emotions about what happened during the day. Naturally, she also mentioned the outsider, Amon, who left immediately after receiving the generous gift. They had already drunk a lot of wine that night. The Ramos brothers were getting more and more agitated as they talked. They believed that Amon had come to the Cape States to return the staff because he could not open the spatial ring himself and did not dare to ask a supreme mage for help. Nero must have mentioned something else in the cave, but that cunning outsider didn't say anything. They really should have detained this person and interrogated him, but the city lord didn't allow it. Julian smiled faintly and said, "The city lord's decision is very wise and reasonable. You shouldn't be rude to Amon in public. But you should find out the details of Lord Nero's last words in the cave. They were left by your ancestor. You have the right to ask about them. But the city lord has already ordered that there are some things that cannot be leaked. My opinion is the same as City Lord Dick's." The brothers seemed to have thought of something. They exchanged glances and chatted for a while longer before they left. After the Ramos brothers left, Julian summoned his confidant, Vitru, who was also a senior priest of the Temple of Isis and a 6th-level mage. Vitru nodded solemnly. Finally, Julian said, "You must be careful when dealing with Amon. He was able to cross the desert and arrive in the Cape States safely with the staff. He is at least an advanced warrior. I can see that he has learned body arts." Vitru said, "There can't be too many people involved. I will take a few elite warriors with me. They will be your personal guards. You will stay in the city and not go out for the time being. Give the accompanying warriors a few days off so that no one will suspect anything." This time, Ariya had not only brought 2 mages with him, but also a personal guard of 12 warriors. He himself was an 8th-level supreme mage, and he walked on the official roads of the Empire, so he did not need this kind of protection at all. However, the pomp and ceremony that a high priest of the Shrine of Isis should have was still a must. The supreme mage thought for a moment and said, "Then let Heaven lead the team. He is only one step away from becoming a 7th-level supreme warrior. If he succeeds, he will become a supreme warrior when he returns. I will find an opportunity for him to replace Gabriel. Gabriel has been protecting the adoratress wholeheartedly. He has become Maria's right-hand man. The one who should be sent out from the Temple of Isis is Gabriel. Let's not talk about this now. Let's talk about your plan first." Vitru agreed. "Heaven is the captain of your guards. Of course he is trustworthy. Let him lead the team and pick 3 warriors. I will be safe with him by his side. Haven is also a hunter. He has learned many skills in the Temple of Isis. He is an expert in tracking and assassination. No matter where that Amon goes, no matter how well he hides, he can't escape. Arya nodded in satisfaction, then cautioned, Haven has also undergone the second awakening of his power. He can use low-level magic, and he can use mid-level scrolls as well. He should have no problem working with you. But don't underestimate him. Amon has a lot of scrolls in his hands. Be careful of those scrolls. Vitra was puzzled, he is not a mage. Scrolls won't help him. Julian shook his head, how can you be sure that no mage is behind this? If he is an advanced warrior, he may have gone through the second awakening of his power and can use elementary magic. He can also use intermediate scrolls. Haven was surprised, my lord, do you suspect that he is a sorcerer? Julian's face darkened, it's always good to be careful. As for whether he is a sorcerer or not, you will know when the time comes. Here are 3 scrolls, 1 advanced scroll and 2 intermediate scrolls. Take them well and give 1 intermediate scroll to Haven in case he needs it. Vitru hurriedly declined, these scrolls are very precious. My lord, you should keep them for yourself. We don't dare to use them. Julian insisted, it's best if you don't use them. I don't want to waste them on Amon. I'm just giving them to you just in case. Anyway, it's not a big deal even if you use these scrolls. Amon has more scrolls. As long as we can capture him, we won't lose anything. Vitru took the scrolls and asked, is there anything else you want, my lord? Julian smiled coldly, if Haven tracks down Amon, you can leak the information to Obama Ramon. But don't let him know who sent the information. I'm sure he will track it down as well. Vitru was puzzled, what do you mean, my lord? Don't you want to keep it a secret? Julian replied, of course I want to keep it a secret. No one can find out what you are doing. But if something goes wrong, for example, if you use the scrolls too loudly, someone will have to take the blame, right? Even if someone investigates, they will only find out that Obama was secretly tracking Amon. Vitru gave a thumbs up, my lord is wise. Julian continued, tomorrow morning, I will give the guards a day off. Let them travel around the city to relax. As for you, I will send you back to Montefiore to report on some matters. Also, send a secret letter to the other 2 high priests. After you leave the city, meet up with Haven and take care of Amon. Lord Julian suddenly received an order from the adoratress to stay in the Cape States for a year. He didn't make any preparations beforehand, so he sent Vitru back to Montefiore the next day to report on some matters and bring back some things for him. Vitru left early in the morning. The benevolent Lord Arya was compassionate to his subordinates. He even gave his bodyguards a break and allowed them to wander around the city. Rod Dick, who had been working hard for many days, finally returned to his mansion. His attendants and advisors also returned to his mansion. When Aristotle entered the gate, he was stopped by a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper said to him respectfully, my lord, when Mr. Amon left yesterday, he asked me to pass this to you. The gatekeeper handed Amon a box made of coconut shells. The craftsmanship was very beautiful. It was a little thing that Amon bought a few days ago. It was sealed with glue, so he didn't know what was inside. He had to cut open the seal with a knife. Amon didn't greet Aristotle, but left him something before he left. Aristotle was very surprised. He hurried back to his room and opened the box. Lying quietly in the box was a divine stone shining with a watery luster. It was the extremely precious aquaticore. Picking up the blue divine stone, there was a small slip of paper with a short sentence written on it, thank you. Aristotle realized that Amon had already recognized him. Before he left the parangan and the aquaticore to thank Aristotle for saving his life. Aristotle's expression was very complicated. He suddenly stomped his feet and walked out. He went to the backyard and asked to see Rod Dick. He knew very well that the governor had been tired for the past few days and had just laid down to rest. He also knew that Amon had left yesterday and should be far away from the city by now. He had planned to wait for Drick to wake up before reporting some things, but seeing the things Amon had left behind, he didn't want to wait any longer. If it wasn't for the fact that Aristotle was his most trusted advisor, Rod Dick would definitely be angry. The servants didn't dare to report to him. But for Aristotle to suddenly ask to see him in this kind of situation, it must be something important. Drick sat in his bedroom, put on his clothes, and called Aristotle in. Aristotle apologized as soon as he entered the room. Then he put the small box on the table and opened it. "My lord, please take a look. This is what Amon asked the porter to give me before he left." Rod Dick saw the aquaticore at first glance. He was startled. He picked up the note and looked at it. He asked in confusion, "Sir, what's this about?" Aristotle sighed, "I'm afraid my lord doesn't remember, but Amon used to be a miner in Duk. He was the one who mined the god's tear. He was the adoratress' servant for 3 days. He thanked me because I saved him in Duk. I've mentioned this to you before. That child has grown up and is almost unrecognizable. But he knows me." He briefly told the story of the past. Rod Dick's eyes widened. What a coincidence. I heard that Duk was destroyed by the flood, but Amon is still alive. What a blessing from the gods. When he mined the god's tear, it was also the blessing of the goddess Isis. Why didn't this child tell me about his past? If I knew, I would have thanked him even more. Aristotle said, he didn't tell me because he had concerns, or he didn't want to remember the disaster in his hometown. But this child is like a messenger of the gods to you. He was the one who mined the god's tear, and today he is the one who returned the staff of the Oracle of Duk. You have to protect such a person no matter what. Think about what he has brought to you. Drick raised his head. What do you mean? Did something happen? Aristotle pondered. To be exact, I don't know what will happen. It's just a personal guess, and I don't want to say it. But seeing this thing, I have to say it, or I won't be able to sleep peacefully. Lord Julian also summoned several people in private yesterday. I'm afraid it has something to do with Amon. You can ask Judas, or better yet, Lord Aria himself, as to the details of the affair. I hope that nothing will happen that will damage your reputation and disgrace God's favor. I hope that all this is just me being paranoid. Rod Dick's expression became solemn. He waved his hand. Go out and call Faal Judah. Faal Judah was surprised to be summoned in Rod Dick's bedroom. After he bowed, Rod Dick asked directly, Lord Julian summoned you last night. What did they talk about? Faal did not dare to hide anything in front of him. He reported his private meeting with Julian and tried to relay every word in detail, only omitting the part where he said bad things about Amon. Finally, he carefully explained, My lord, it was you who asked me to take care of Lord Julian's daily life and try to satisfy all of his requests. I can see that Lord Julian is worried about Amon, but I also advised him not to do anything that would damage your reputation. Rod Dick nodded, I understand. Tell the guards to prepare a horse. I'm going to see Lord Julian. Julian was sleeping soundly when he was woken up by a servant. He was about to lose his temper when he heard that it was Drick who had come to visit him urgently. In the reception room, after sending the others away, Rod Dick went straight to the point. Dear Supreme Mage, do you wish to pursue Amon? Is there anything I can do for you? Aria was taken aback by this question, but he immediately smiled and said, City Lord Drick, in your city, everything is really under your control. But I'm very curious as to why you would ask such a question. Are you suspecting me of something? Rod Dick hurriedly shook his head, No. No matter what Lord Julian does, there is always a reason. I should provide assistance. I just want to say one thing. If Amon is harmed, it will damage the reputation of the city, the shrine, and you. It is not worth it. Aria was still able to laugh. He smiled and added, "This will be a serious blow to your reputation, Lord Castellan." "Of course, I understand that. So please rest assured that no matter what happens, the situation you are worried about will not happen." "Can I make such a promise?" Rod Dick did not say anything. Julian smiled faintly and said, "Lord Drick, I have been ordered to stay in the Cape States for a year to supervise and guide the affairs of the shrine here. I would like to ask you one thing, just a hypothetical question. Between me and a foreign hunter, whose will you protect?" Rod Dick lowered his head and said, "Why would I ask such a question? Of course it will be you, the noble Lord Julian. There is no need to even say it. In fact, I have always hoped that you can become the chief priest of the Cape States." The return of the staff at this time symbolizes the will of the gods. Rod Dick's sudden mention of this matter surprised Julian a little. He laughed and said, "In just a few days, especially after seeing the relics of Lord Nero, I already know that being the chief priest here is no less than the high priest of the Temple of Isis. But I have no choice. This is not something I can decide myself. I need the order of the Temple of Isis and the approval of the pharaohs of Igut. So it is useless for you to ask me personally. Even if I am willing, I can't agree." Rod Dick raised his head and said, "As long as you are willing, I hope I will not be disrespectful. If that day really comes, I will still need your full support for everything in the Cape States." The smile on Julian's face became wider. "So Lord Drick values me so much that you are willing to give me the position of the chief priest." Julian is a little flattered. "If that is the case, why should we continue to doubt each other? I promise you that I will never do anything that will hurt the reputation of the city and you. But there are two things I have to remind you in private." "Rod Dick, please say." "You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.